You know, every day here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Louise and I and our team, Sean, Nate, Shira, Dave, Chase, Sue, Nigel, Ron, we all work to put together the very, very best show we possibly can. And there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the show. And one of the things that comes out of that is a lot of content, a lot of specific information that we go through and we dig out and, we want to share with you. And Sue puts that into our newsletter every week. And I think you will, if you don't already receive our newsletter, it comes in email every day, about an hour after we're off the air, or maybe a couple hours after we're off the air. And Sue goes through and pulls literally every link to every story that we talked about and puts it into the newsletter. It's free. We don't sell a list or anything. You complete safety and security. There's no charge. There's no nothing. Just, plug in your email address over at thomhartmann.com. And you get signed up for the newsletter. It's all fairly obvious. You'll see it on the website. So check it out, thomhartmann.com. Thank you. Our selection today for the Thom Hartmann Book Club is This Land, How Cowboys, Capitalism, and Corruption Are Ruining the American West by Christopher Ketchum. This is from Chapter 1. It's about halfway through the chapter. He's talking about Bernard DeVoto. DeVoto was the first major historian of the West who was also an environmentalist and an activist, the first chronicler of what Wallace Stenger called the West's curious desire to rape itself. DeVoto was a Westerner raised in Utah. He suffered in the provincialism and intolerance of Mormon country, went east to study and then teach at Harvard, settled in Cambridge, but never forgot the beauty of his native ground. Loving the land and history, said a magazine profile, but loathing the society. His histories, novels, criticism, his essays in Harper's Magazine were for 20 years, where for 20 years he wrote the oldest column in American journalism, Easy Chair, pointed always west. His trilogy, published in the 1940s, The Year of Decision, Across the Wide Missouri, and The Course of Empire, garnered the Pulitzer, the Bancroft, and the National Book Award. Widely celebrated, DeVoto used his position to become his generation's most outspoken defender of the public lands. He called the West a plundered province, a resource colony for corporations and absentee landlords who practiced, quote, an economy of liquidation. He was broad in his assault on the liquidators. He went after the timbermen, the mining companies, the stockmen, the cattle barons, the oilmen and gasmen, the overgrazers, the deforesters, the denuders, the profiteers of gold rushes and grass rushes. He named the bankers and congressmen who abetted the plundering, the Western hogs, he called them. They've been busy for a century laying waste to the West, long before the public domain was vested with any permanence legally in the hands of the American people, before there was a consideration of the land itself or any environmental ethic. The West had been torn up, beaten down, subjected to the greed and profligacy of the commodity users. Ironically, the users, in their race to liquidate, helped drive the creation of the public land system we know today, as they proved the need for federal stewardship to stop their abuses. Massive timber frauds in the 19th century, the largest land frauds seen in the West, led directly to the establishment of the Forest Service in the 20th century, its purpose to stop deforestation. Out-of-control cattle numbers in the steppe, overgrazing that turned the fragile soil to dust, led directly to the federal grazing regulatory system that eventually became the BLM. When in 1946 the commodity users conspired to destroy the public land system, the system in which DeVoto saw the only hope for Western conservation and preservation, he stood to oppose them. Quote, he was the first conservationist in nearly half a century, except for Franklin D. Roosevelt, to command a national audience, said Arthur Schlesinger Jr., a student of his at Harvard. No one did more in the post-war years to rouse public opinion against the spoilers than DeVoto. DeVoto and Schlesinger had seen firsthand what unregulated industry could wreak in the arid lands when they drove cross-country together in the spring of 1940 and entered western Kansas past the 100th meridian. These were the last years of the Dust Bowl before FDR's soil conservation programs and the return rains of the 40s could heal the land. Wrote DeVoto, a cemetery was 10 inches deep in sand. Half the headstones had toppled into it and been partly covered. Sagging shacks that had been farmhouses had their windows blown out, and dust was 2 or 4 or 6 feet deep against their western walls and a foot deep against the far wall. a repulsive dust as fine as sifted flour. Now, 6 years after that trip with Schlesinger, Devoto was confronted with the West's cattle barons, the liquidators of the grass, who were hell-bent on reducing the region to the same mess of dust. In 1946, the Joint Committee on Public Lands of the American National Livestock Association met in Salt Lake City to discuss the goal of undermining what few regulations had been placed on livestock operators under the newly formed Bureau of Land Management. The stock growers' ambition went further than mere deregulation. They hatched a plan with the help of friends in Congress to begin moving all federal land, the BLM and Forest Service domain, as well as the national parks, into the control of the states. The plan evolved through 1946, 47, 48, with legislation making its way on Capitol Hill. Devoto covered the story for Harper's. He cautioned that the stock growers were attempting, quote, one of the biggest land grabs in American history. The public lands are first to be transferred to the states on the wholly justified assumption that there should be a state government not wholly compliant to the desires of stock growers. It could be pressured into compliance, he wrote in Harper's. Nothing in history suggests the states are adequate to protect their own resources, or even want to, or suggests that cattlemen and sheepmen are capable of regulating themselves even for their own benefit, still less the public's, end quote. The long-term plan, he said, was to get rid of the public lands altogether, to place the common possession of the American people into private hands. The livestock industry went on the attack, mounted a PR campaign to discredit Devoto, and pressured Harper's to cease its support. Unmoved, the magazine continued for 3 years to publish his relentless exposés of the intrigues in the state houses and in the Western Caucasus. Devoto had convinced the editors, when no other publication that mattered in the East cared, that the threat of such land transfer was an existential one. This Land by Christopher.
Want to connect with the show?
The Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome to our program. Thom Hartmann here with you. There's so much going on we're going to get into today. In our second hour, Congressman Mark Pocan will be with us for the entire hour, taking your calls. In our third hour, we're going to do a deep dive into Boris Johnson, the UK, and Brexit. We're going to start with Victoria Jones, who has been a reporter reporting on this program for years and years and years. And then we're going to go to Professor Richard Wolff and ask him if he thinks that some of the dire predictions, that Brexit, for a hard Brexit happening in October, for example, could crash the entire world economy. So, we'll see where all this goes. But I want to start today and engage you with this question of what do we do about a Republican Party that has presided over the death of almost 16,000 people, according to new statistics from the federal government itself. The National Bureau of Economic Research looked into Medicaid expansion and found that the good news was that the death rate, the mortality rate, has dropped over 9% in the 4 years for which there is actual government data available. Now, that's good news. The bad news is that 9% drop in the death rate is only happening in the states that have expanded Medicaid to low-income people. It was Stalin who is reputed to have said, one death is a tragedy, 1 million deaths is a statistic. You say 16,000 people. Actually, the number they came up with, 15,600 people. And, it's like a statistic. Okay, 15,600 people died because, the Republicans wouldn't expand Medicaid in red states. This is like, but you tell the one person's story, like Charlene Dill. Charlene Dill was a young woman in her late 20s who had a heart condition, and she had three little kids. And she was working 3 jobs down in Florida. 3 jobs. She was working she was cleaning houses. She was working, I believe, as a real estate person, selling real estate or something. And she was selling vacuum cleaners, and she was selling, I was going to say encyclopedias, but I might be thinking about my own dad. In any case, she had these 3 jobs, and they were all low-paying jobs and all basically kind of commission-based jobs. And she literally could not afford her heart medication. So she began cutting her pills in half. And she went to work one day, to her 3rd job. She was exhausted. It was 7, 8 o'clock at night. She had taken a break to go home and feed her kids, and then she'd gone back to clean somebody's house or to sell them a vacuum cleaner. I forget which it was. And she died for lack of her own heart medication. Well, actually, she died because Rick Scott, who is now the senator from Florida, was then the governor of Florida. Before that, by the way, he was the CEO of a company, and he and the company were convicted of the largest Medicare fraud in the history of the United States. This company that made him rich. So he's perfect to be a Republican, right? So he had decided that we're not going to expand Medicaid in Florida, even though the federal government will do it for free. Right? The federal government will give you money. Nope, ain't going to happen. All because it was Obama's thing. You know, this is Obamacare, right? Obama passed that. It was a Democrat who passed that. We can't let Democrats get credit for anything good. So we're gonna let people in our states die. And that's what Republicans have been doing. And I would love to see Charlene Dill's story come back. In fact, I wrote about her in my book that's coming out this fall, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America. I interviewed one of her very, very best friends, a woman named Kathleen, and boy, what an amazing story. But every one of those 15,600 people has family, friends, relatives who care about them, that they cared about. I mean, these are real human stories. And then you look at, you know, what Trump's people have to say about this. Seem Verma is the, I thought it was SEMA, but in any case it says Seem Verma, is the head of the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS it's called. So she's the person that Trump put in charge of Medicare and Medicaid. And she says that to expand Medicare to cover everybody in America, she said this is the largest threat to the American healthcare system. Well, if you call the American healthcare system a profit machine designed to make people like Stephen J. Hemsley and Dollar Bill McGuire, the two guys who took over $1 billion each out of United Healthcare as CEOs, you know, if you define the American healthcare system as a system designed to make a small number of people who own health insurance companies or run health insurance companies obscenely rich, then yeah, I suppose that they are the biggest threats. Or Medicare for all would be the biggest threat. And she says even a public option is a huge threat because the public option will lead to, she says it's a Trojan horse that's going to lead to single-payer health care. Oh my God, we could be like Canada? We could be like France, we could be like Germany, we could be like Finland, Denmark, Norway, Sweden. We could be like, you know, countries that where everybody's actually covered with health care. And there's no billionaires, you know, with their hands in our pockets saying, you know, no, we just discovered you had a pre-existing condition. We're not going to cover you. This is, I mean, literally Republican policy is killing people. And you can lay some of this at the feet of the Supreme Court. In 2012, in the, National Association of Manufacturers versus Sebelius, as I recall. Kathleen Sebelius was the Health, Education, Welfare, whatever it was, HUD, secretary under Obama. And, you know, the Republicans sued, and John Roberts said, oh, we'll split the baby. You don't have to have the requirement that you have insurance. You don't have to have, you know, the absolute, you know, a penalty if you fail to have insurance. The individual mandate, it's called. You don't have to have that. And states don't have to expand Medicaid. They can choose not to. They can do what Rick Scott did and say, you know, if Charlene Dill can't afford her medication, just let her die. I mean, that's essentially what Rick Scott said. And the fact that, I mean, you know, remember this woman who was killed in San Francisco by an undocumented immigrant, you know, somebody who was here illegally? In fact, as I recall, she was killed accidentally. He had like dropped his gun and it went off and it killed her. And I can't remember her name because I don't watch Fox News, but everybody who watches Fox News knows this woman's name. All you have to do is say this woman's name and boom, they're immediately triggered. these conservative snowflakes, who watch Fox News all day long. And frankly, I think that the Democrats should have turned Charlene Dill into somebody just as famous. I certainly made an effort to on this program, but I couldn't get the party with me, right? But this is what's going on. There's a few other things going on too. Fred just got an email from Trump Pence. Hey, Fred, I'm so over paper straws. This is from Brad Parscale, the campaign manager for Donald J. Trump for president. I'm so over paper straws, and I'm sure you are too. Like most liberal areas, paper straws don't work and they fall apart instantly. That's why we launched our latest product, Official Trump Straws. Now you can finally be free from liberal paper straws that fall apart within minutes and ruin your drink. Does the word snowflake come to mind here? These pathetic conservative, we can't, paper straw, I don't like paper straw. Trump straws are custom made with the official Trump logo. Recyclable and reusable, and as always, 100% made in America. Oh, recyclable. Oh my God. Some liberal must have helped him write this thing. Paper straws are just another example of failed liberal overregulation. Fear not, President Trump has the perfect solution. Supplies are extremely limited, so be sure to get your official Trump straws today. And then there's a link where you can go give them money and they'll send you some plastic straws. Seriously. Seriously. And finally, this amazing story about this guy who killed a mob boss because, and this made big news, everybody thought it was a mob hit. He killed a mob boss on Staten Island, shot him dead, 10 bullets. Because he thought that this mob boss was part of the deep state. The same guy had stalked a bunch of Democratic members of Congress. I'll tell you that whole story in 4 minutes when we come back from the break. Stick around.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Because that story gets very, very weird. And welcome back. John in Minneapolis. Hey, John, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, I just think that overall, yes, the Republican Party could care less if people live or die. All they care about is money. They're a faction. We need to grow a backbone in the Democratic Party and just, we need to get rid of him, Pence. I'm talking about Donald Trump, and just go for it. I'm sick of this appeasement. I'm really getting tired of this. What more do we have to take before somebody is murdered or shot or killed for no reason at all except that we appease? They're not snowflakes. They're just absolutely nuts. And this guy Donald Trump is a cult leader, and you should hear the things that people send me on Facebook, what people say. It's just absolutely bizarre. They've lost their minds, and we need to take the leadership and not like Tom Perez says, we have to, litigate it. High crimes and misdemeanors, let's get them out of there, and we can get Pence out of there also. I'm tired of it. I've had enough. Yeah. I don't want to end up like Nazi Germany. No way. This is just, BS, really. Why should we
I'm with you, and, I'm guessing that you're represented by Ilhan Omar?
I am, represented by her, and I voted for her because of her policies. And she has to, deal with Donald Trump. How can she get anything done if she's continually, she has to counter his overt and nasty racism and misogyny. I want her to do that.
Yeah.
Everything is quite quiet here. We haven't had any jihad. And, frankly, most of the people that voted for her were white because we believed in her skill as a politician to deliver what we want. And I get attacked from people outside of this district because I voted for her, as if she's running for president. She's not running for president. She represents me, and literally probably thousands of people. She won with 78% of the vote.
Yeah. Well, I asked that question because if you were, I don't know if Minneapolis has, like here in Portland, if you live in the south part of Portland, you're represented by Kurt Schrader. If you live in the north part, you're represented by Earl Blumenauer.
No, the whole entire city is represented by her.
Okay.
In the 5th district. I live on the periphery, right on the edge of it.
Yeah.
But no, actually I don't, because there's about 3 or 4 suburbs that surround Minneapolis that are also included in the district, and that's most of them will vote Republican, but it's a very solid across the board, voting for her. We voted for a Democrat since Hubert Humphrey was our congressman, and that's in the 1940s.
Yeah.
We have never.
Well, the reason I asked was to just bring up the point that if you don't know where your member of Congress stands, and I'm not speaking so much to you, John, because it's Ilhan Omar, but if you don't know where your member of Congress stands and your member of Congress is a Democrat, you damn well better start calling 202-225-3121 and telling them. I
encourage people from this district to call other districts and call Tom Perez and call other people and say, look, we're tired of it. Yeah. I'm part Jewish. And, when she came here and was greeted by supporters, there was a rabbi in the crowd. You know why? Because, of course, she is against the overt racism, misogyny, and anti-Semitism on their side.
Amen. John, thank you. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. So I just told you about how, Trump is selling straws as a fundraiser, plastic straws, because the liberals have forced paper straws on too many conservatives, and they're really upset. And they want plastic straws, these poor little snowflakes. Now, Arkansas, another Republican-controlled state, Arkansas is going to, there's a state law that is going into effect this week that will make it illegal to call a veggie burger a veggie burger. You can't call it a veggie burger. You have to call it something else. Words like burger and meat and sausage, all that stuff, you can't use those words anymore in Arkansas. The state wants to, the tofurkey people are quite upset, right? It's like, oh, it sounds like turkey. But the legislator behind the bill, his name is David Hillman. He says, you can't sell a Chevy and call it a Cadillac. Right. But you can sell a Chevy and call it a car. Maybe not in Louisiana. I don't know. But it's like, Republican snowflakes. I'm sorry. I'm just getting over these people. It's bizarre what they're doing. So, in addition, there was one other point I wanted to make, and then I want to tell you about this guy who killed the crime boss. There's an interesting story. I'm on the mailing list for Freedom Works, for the Koch brothers organization. And they sent out an email a couple of days ago just going nuts about the budget deal, calling it the Pelosi budget deal. And, Trump and Pelosi have negotiated a deal that is going to postpone until 2021, and in other words, after the presidential election, July of 2021, any discussion about raising the debt ceiling. The debt ceiling is off the table until July 2021. And in the meantime, it's going to have $1 trillion deficit every year, and it's going to have a $300 billion increase in spending. Now, the hard right, the libertarian right, the billionaire right, they're very upset about this because it's actually increasing federal spending, which means that, at some point in the future, there'll be a justification to raise taxes on rich people. When a Democrat comes into office and suddenly everybody talks about, it's the deficit, it's the debt. Keep in mind, the last president to preside over a balanced budget was Bill Clinton. The last president before him to preside over a balanced budget was Jimmy Carter. So, in any case, the take that I wanted to share with you about this is that there's a certain amount of danger here for Democrats. And I'm not saying that Nancy Pelosi shouldn't have cut this deal and shouldn't go through with it, because there's a lot going for it. But the one thing that you all need to know about is that when you increase government spending by $300 billion, you are stimulating the economy huge. Keep in mind, Barack Obama got us out of the Great Recession, the Bush Depression. Barack Obama got us out of that with a $700 billion stimulus bill, a third of which was tax cuts, which had no effect on stimulus. So it was really about a more or less $450 billion stimulus, government spending bill, cash for clunkers and infrastructure and all kinds of stuff like that. So now they're doing a $300 billion budget deal. They're not calling it a stimulus deal, but that's really what it is. So hang on, right? Over the next 2 years, you're going to probably see the economy get very overheated, and the stock market go up, housing prices go up, and then probably after the election, the Democrats are hoping that the Republicans are hoping that a Democrat comes into office, and the economy will crash, as soon as he or she becomes president. And then they can say, see, we told you, if a Democrat gets into, and they're going to try, they think that they can destroy the Democratic Party finally forever by doing this, and have that Democratic president be thought of as Herbert Hoover. But anyhow, back to the guy who he murdered Francisco Cali, who was a Gambino crime family boss, thinking that he was a member of the deep state, Frankie Boy Cali. And this New York guy who shot him, and his name is Mr. Comello, this is from his lawyer. Mr. Comello became certain that he was enjoying the protection of President Trump himself and that he had the president's full support. Beginning with the election of President Trump in November 2016, Anthony Comello's family began to notice changes in his personality. I'm reading from the defense argument. Comello allegedly rammed his GMC Sierra pickup into Cali's parked Cadillac Escalade, prompting Cali to come outside to investigate. Comello brought out handcuffs to arrest him and to take him to the appropriate authorities. And then, the mob boss reached for his waistband, probably to pull out a gun, and this guy just killed him, shot him 10 times. Previously, this is where it gets bizarre. Previously, Comello had sought to arrest, in quotes, New York Mayor Bill de Blasio and U.S. Representatives Maxine Waters and Adam Schiff. This guy's a serious Fox News watcher, from all indications. He shot Cali 10 times, and he got away. Took the police several days to track him down. Again, they thought it was a mob hit. It turns out that the whole, Q thing, the QAnon thing, which he had just gotten totally immersed in, following it on YouTube and everything else, that this whole Q thing has now produced a murder. I don't know why this isn't front page news. This guy thought that Donald Trump had his back. He thought that he was protecting Donald Trump from the deep state. Where is the next crazy, and who are they going to think is the deep state? Is it me? Is it another Democratic member of Congress? Pick up your calls after this.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
So, Medicaid expansion. Can't call a veggie burger a veggie burger. Plastic straws. A mob boss being killed by a QAnon person? Our selection today for the Thom Hartmann Book Club is This Land, How Cowboys, Capitalism, and Corruption Are Ruining the American West by Christopher Ketchum. This is from Chapter 1. It's about halfway through the chapter. He's talking about Bernard DeVoto. DeVoto was the first major historian of the West who was also an environmentalist and an activist, the first chronicler of what Wallace Stenger called the West's curious desire to rape itself. DeVoto was a Westerner raised in Utah. He suffered in the provincialism and intolerance of Mormon country, went east to study, and then teach at Harvard, settled in Cambridge, but never forgot the beauty of his native ground. Loving the land and history, said a magazine profile, but loathing the society. His histories, novels, criticism, his essays in Harper's Magazine were for 20 years, where for 20 years he wrote the oldest column in American journalism, Easy Chair, pointed always west. His trilogy, published in the 1940s, The Year of Decision, Across the Wide Missouri, and The Course of Empire, garnered the Pulitzer, the Bancroft, and the National Book Award. Widely celebrated, DeVoto used his position to become his generation's most outspoken defender of the public lands. He called the West a plundered province, a resource colony for corporations and absentee landlords who practiced, quote, an economy of liquidation. He was broad in his assault on the liquidators. He went after the timbermen, the mining companies, the stockmen, the cattle barons, the oilmen and gasmen, the overgrazers, the deforesters, the denuders, the profiteers of gold rushes and grass rushes. He named the bankers and congressmen who abetted the plundering, the Western hogs, he called them. They've been busy for a century laying waste to the West. Long before the public domain was vested with any permanence legally in the hands of the American people, before there was a consideration of the land itself or any environmental ethic, the West had been torn up, beaten down, subjected to the greed and profligacy of the commodity users. Ironically, the users, in their race to liquidate, helped drive the creation of the public land system we know today, as they proved the need for federal stewardship to stop their abuses. Massive timber frauds in the 19th century, the largest land frauds seen in the West, led directly to the establishment of the Forest Service in the 20th century, its purpose to stop deforestation. Out-of-control cattle numbers in the steppe, overgrazing that turned the fragile soil to dust, led directly to the federal grazing regulatory system that eventually became the BLM. When in 1946 the commodity users conspired to destroy the public land system, the system in which DeVoto saw the only hope for Western conservation and preservation, he stood to oppose them. Quote, he was the first conservationist in nearly half a century, except for Franklin D. Roosevelt, to command a national audience, said Arthur Schlesinger Jr., a student of his at Harvard. No one did more in the post-war years to rouse public opinion against the spoilers than DeVoto. DeVoto and Schlesinger had seen firsthand what unregulated industry could wreak in the arid lands when they drove cross-country together in the spring of 1940 and entered western Kansas past the 100th meridian. These were the last years of the Dust Bowl before FDR's soil conservation programs and the return rains of the 40s could heal the land. Wrote DeVoto, a cemetery was 10 inches deep in sand. Half the headstones had toppled into it and been partly covered. Sagging shacks that had been farmhouses had their windows blown out, and dust was 2 or 4 or 6 feet deep against their western walls and a foot deep against the far wall. A repulsive dust as fine as sifted flour. Now, 6 years after that trip with Schlesinger, DeVoto was confronted with the West's cattle barons, the liquidators of the grass, who were hell-bent on reducing the region to the same mess of dust. In 1946, the Joint Committee on Public Lands of the American National Livestock Association met in Salt Lake City to discuss the goal of undermining what few regulations had been placed on livestock operators under the newly formed Bureau of Land Management. The stock growers' ambition went further than mere deregulation. They hatched a plan with the help of friends in Congress to begin moving all federal land, the BLM and Forest Service domain, as well as the national parks, into the control of the states. The plan evolved through 1946, 47, 48, with legislation making its way on Capitol Hill. DeVoto covered the story for Harper's. He cautioned that the stock growers were attempting, quote, one of the biggest land grabs in American history. The public lands are first to be transferred to the states on the wholly justified assumption that there should be a state government not wholly compliant to the desires of stock growers. It could be pressured into compliance, he wrote in Harper's. Nothing in history suggests the states are adequate to protect their own resources, or even want to, or suggests that cattlemen and sheepmen are capable of regulating themselves even for their own benefit, still less the public's, end quote. The long-term plan, he said, was to get rid of the public lands altogether, to place the common possession of the American people into private hands. The livestock industry went on the attack, mounted a PR campaign to discredit DeVoto, and pressured Harper's to cease its support. Unmoved, the magazine continued for 3 years to publish his relentless exposés of the intrigues in the state houses and in the Western caucus. Devoto had convinced the editors, when no other publication that mattered in the East cared, that the threat of such land transfer was an existential one. This Land by Christopher.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Geez, does the cruelty ever end? Welcome back, by the way. After it's now documented that Republican governors in red states refusing to allow their working poor. By the way, this is, the Medicaid expansion was not for, quote, welfare bums, right? It wasn't for the homeless people. It wasn't for people who are not working or refuse to work or can't work or whatever. And I don't mean to be dismissive of those categories, because you've got a lot of mental illness and you've got a lot of, other challenges that people have that put them in those kind of situations. But it wasn't for the really poor. The Medicaid, the really poor already have Medicaid or are eligible for it if they sign up. If you make under $2,000 or $3,000 a year in almost every state, I believe in every state in the union, you're covered by Medicaid. The Medicaid expansion was for people who made over $3,000 a year and less than the $13,000 or $14,000 a year, which was the trigger point, the entry point for Obamacare with subsidies. There was this giant hole there that was going to be filled by Medicaid. So these are people who are working, in many cases working full time, but they're working at $7.50 an hour or $7.25 at the federal minimum wage. So anyhow, this cruelty that I was talking about, and now this kind of stuff literally happens every day. Senator Schumer just held a press conference, just issued a press release about it. Senator Democratic leader Chuck Schumer today released the following statement regarding the Trump administration's proposed new rule that would take nutrition assistance away from millions of Americans. This is the Trump administration is proposing to cut 3 million people off food stamps. And Schumer says, quote, "It is outrageous, cruel, and galling that after giving trillions of dollars in tax cuts to the wealthy and the big corporations, the Trump administration, under the guise of fiscal austerity, is attempting to take nutrition assistance away from millions of Americans on the verge of hunger, including school children and people with disabilities. The proposed new rule from the USDA is just the latest Trump administration attack on hardworking American families trying to make ends meet, and could take food out of the mouths of 3 million Americans. I strongly condemn this harmful change proposed by Trump and will fight to make sure these cuts never become a reality." Like I said, this happens every day. Democrats come out and they make really strong statements like this, and none of the media picks it up. Trump comes out and burps, and the media is all over it. And, begging him for answers to questions and obsequious, I've reached the point now where when I've got the TV on and Trump comes on with his live little hits, where he comes on and he'll tell like 15 lies and maybe they'll rebut one. Whenever he comes on, I turn the TV off, or I change the channel, in the hopes that the networks will start to notice a trend. I don't know if you're doing the same thing I am, but wouldn't it be cool? But anyhow, let me get to your calls here. Kurt in Akron, Ohio. Hey, Kurt, what's on your mind today?
Hey. Yes, thank you. This is my first time in a long time calling you. I actually have the day off.
Oh, great.
But anyway, I'm actually a Medicaid eligibility specialist in the state of Ohio. I've been doing it for the past nearly 18 years. Mm-hmm. And I'll tell you something. One thing that really comes to mind is probably about 3-4 weeks ago, I had to go talk to a young girl in her 20s at the hospital bedside because she didn't have health insurance. This is the kind of girl who's working in a temp agency, who is putting herself through school, basically following the rules, trying to make a better life for herself. Well, anyway, life happened. She got sick, like seriously sick. And her first concern was the hospital bill. Right. So right away I told her, don't worry about the bill. I will see what I can do to take care of it. Well, lo and behold, after talking with her, getting everything I needed, within, I want to say, 7 to 10 days, I was fortunate enough to get her onto the expanded Medicaid in the state of Ohio.
Right. But had it been Florida, that would not have been the case. She would have been...
Right, she would have died.
Right, she could have died, or she would have, left the hospital with a $100,000 bill.
Right, so this way it was pretty close. It was probably about $75,000 when it was all said and done.
Wow.
And, the the thing, and I have my issues with some of the stuff. Like, I do think 138% above the federal poverty level is a little low, especially if you're making $10 an hour and working 40 hours a week.
Right.
Because one person, if you're a family of one, you can only make just above $1,400 a month. A family of two can just make around $1,944 a month in order for you to be eligible for Medicaid at the 138% federal poverty standard.
Right.
So that's why, after listening to you for years, I'm a big advocate of Medicare for all.
Yeah.
I really am. But what I
And you do this for a living.
Yes, I do. I've been doing this for almost 18 years.
Amazing. So you were about to say,
what I would do, I'm sorry?
I was just apologizing for interrupting you and asking you what you were going to, you had a final statement.
Oh, no, that's fine. But no, what I was going to say is after listening to you, I've become a huge advocate of Medicare for all. But what I would do, because, we can't do radical change in this country anymore, you got to appease a little bit, I guess, is maybe at 65 and older, cover 100% of someone's medical care. Maybe 50 to 64, 75 or 80%. And then maybe anyone under the age of 50, maybe do 70 or 75%. I would just kind of phase it in at that point.
Yeah, you're just opening holes, though, for private insurance companies to fill in the difference. I mean, but Bernie's proposal is just take 4 years and start dropping the Medicare eligibility age, or maybe raising it. I'm not sure if his proposal, starts out with children or if it starts out with, people 50 to 65, for example.
Well, if you remember your history, President Truman actually wanted to, at least with Social Security, because going into those social programs of then, which were good for the American people, because like you said, for every dollar spent in tax dollars, you got $7 back. If you remember, he was talking about even lowering the age of women who were survivors, or just women in general who were married to someone, from 65 to 60 years old.
Yeah, and I think frankly we should be doing that with Social Security. We should be lowering it down to 60, and we should cover everybody with Medicare. I mean, it's just pretty straightforward stuff. It's just Bernie would phase it in over 4 years, because it is going to take a while for the bureaucracy to kick in. And you don't have to ban private insurance. In Canada for a while they'd actually banned private insurance, and then they let it back in. Because rich people wanted to have their fancy policies, and I don't have a problem with that.
That's what they want, that's their privilege.
Yeah,
they
exactly.
want to pay for it, that's their privilege.
Right? Who cares? But let's cover all of us.
Right, but I just feel like, if my tax dollars are going to help someone to have a healthy lifestyle, or get a better education, or even job training, or whatever the case may be, I have no problem with my taxes going up to 50%. To do that, because when you think about it, when you're paying for out-of-pocket medical expenses, education, whatever the case may be, people don't realize, we may have a low tax rate compared to the rest of the world, but we're paying all that out-of-pocket, which is far more expensive, which is what you call the for-profit situation.
Right. Yeah, it's functionally a tax. I'm with you.
Kurt,
I need to move along, but thank you for the call, and thanks for your comments, and particularly an informed perspective. I appreciate it. Sheila in Greenville, Pennsylvania. Hey, Sheila, what's up?
Hey, I just wanted to let you know, Tom, here in western Pennsylvania, and I'm like an hour and a half out of Pittsburgh, an hour and a half out of Erie, an hour and a half out of Cleveland, 45 minutes from Youngstown. They already got commercials on the TV, and I've seen them for about a month, one in particular against Medicare for all.
Wow.
People holding up signs saying, it's going to take you 6 months to get into your doctor.
Oh, I've seen that ad.
If you have cancer, you're not going to be able to get into your cancer specialist for 8 months. I mean,
right.
I'm like, when I saw that commercial, and I've seen it more than once, I almost wanted to smash my TV, which is a shame.
Yeah, it's just filled with lies. But this is, you've got healthcare billionaires and multimillionaires who are funding campaigns. You've got healthcare companies that are health insurance, I should say. The weasel parasites that have attached themselves to the body of American people, who have hundreds of millions, billions of dollars to spend on deceptive ads like this, and it's going to get really, really ugly. I guarantee you,
Oh, yeah.
as we go into the election.
And like I said, I've seen this one for a month at least.
Yeah.
And that's another thing. Don't they have to disclose who they are? There was no disclosure at the bottom of the screen of what
not
insurance
anymore.
company or what was putting it out.
No, the disclosure requirements have just been eviscerated by Citizens United. So, no, they don't.
I didn't know that because, I've watched it a few times. I'm like, why isn't it telling me? You know, I'm sure
because it doesn't have to do with a specific political campaign, and therefore they can say anything they want. Sheila, thanks for the call. Great to hear from you. Mona, is it Mona or Mona in Lake Dallas, Texas?
Hi, Tom. It's Mona.
Hey, Mona. So what's up?
Well, it's pretty tough being a progressive living here in the state of Texas. I don't put a lot of bumper stickers on my vehicle. I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, I get it.
Anyway, yeah, you were talking about, the states that didn't pick up the Medicaid expansion, and of course Texas was one of those. And that happened at a time when I was recently divorced and was working, multiple jobs at $7.25 an hour because I'd been a stay-at-home mom for a while. So I had to basically re-enter the workforce. My income for those years was an average of only $8,000 a year. I literally could not get any help for medical problems, and I had a chronic illness, fibromyalgia, and I had zero options unless I could scrape together the money to go to a low-cost clinic, and then after that, everything else had to come out of my pocket as well. And when they cut the food stamps on top of that, I was down to maybe $96 a month or less that was coming in for me to eat on, and it was it was a pretty tough time.
Yeah, trying to eat on $3 a day is a challenge in America.
It's down to about $1.50 a day is what I think I saw recently. $1.50 per meal per day.
Yeah.
So
this has hit you personally.
It propelled me in the direction of alternative medicine because I couldn't get standard medical care. So, I am grateful for that part. But there's a lot of people out there who don't have that option or don't want to go that direction, and I feel bad for them.
Yeah, I'm with you, Mona. Mona, thank you for the call, and thanks for sharing your story. I mean, these are the things that make it real for people. If you know somebody, if there's somebody in your family, if you yourself have gone through this, dealing with, trying to get health care in one of these red states where the Republican governors, like Rick Scott did, he said, Charlene Dill, let her die, right? This is their perspective.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
They literally don't care. I mean, you remember Ron Paul, let him die. Let him die like a dog in the street. They can't pay. Yeah, it's what Alan Grayson said. The Republican health care plan. Number one, don't get sick. Number two, if you do get sick, die fast. That's the Republican health care plan. I don't see anything beyond that, frankly. Keith in Simi Valley, California. Hey, Keith, what's up?
I'm dying fast, Tom. How you doing?
Say what?
Oh, I said I'm dying fast. I said, how you doing?
I'm fine. It's hard to hear you, though. If you could put your mouth closer to the microphone, please. What's on your mind?
Can you hear better now?
Yeah, somewhat.
Good. I'm calling about health care and the difference between me going or a family going and saying, yeah, I've got 4 kids, your premium's $1,000 a month, or Obamacare, your premium's $800 a month, or it's about the same to true single payer. Is not single payer where wherever they get the money, be it payroll taxes, wealth taxes, Wall Street taxes, everybody just gets covered. There is no bill. If I got 9 kids and they're all needing health care, I just pay my taxes and I get care.
Well, in some cases, like in Canada, the way it works in Canada is, most of it is paid for with taxes, but you also, it's very much like Medicare is right now. I pay, a couple $100 every month for my Medicare to the federal government. So, in Canada, somebody called in and said that he paid for his family $140 a month for his health insurance. Now, it varies from province to province because they're all administered by the individual provinces. But there would be a monthly fee that, probably you would pay for that. But yeah, most of it comes out of your taxes. And what that means is that everybody in your family is covered under Bernie's plan, 100% plus vision, plus teeth, plus ears plus, hearing aids and stuff, whatever else is, has been exempted from Medicare up to this point.
I guess my point about it would be is that unassociated to risk, meaning an old person would pay nothing, a young person would pay nothing, even no fee. In other words, some people have no money. There can't even be a fee per month. You should be able to be homeless.
That's right. Yeah, Bernie's plan is no deductibles, and I think this is pretty much the same as Elizabeth Warren's plan, and I'm not sure. Kamala Harris has come out and said she's in favor of Medicare for all.
Medicare didn't use me. I had to become a lawbreaker because they wanted $1,000 a month, and I live in California, and rent here is $1,400 for just a one bedroom. So it's.
So how did you become a lawbreaker, Keith? If you don't mind my asking.
I didn't buy health insurance. I went without health insurance.
Oh, you went without health insurance. So yeah, you're now technically breaking a law, but there's a $75 fine per year on your federal taxes, or at least there was until John Roberts weighed in 2012. So
yeah. I just really think we need to get to single payer where you're just covered and your health and your economics shouldn't matter.
Right.
Because I've been forced to make horrible choices, like between my kids and taking care of them and my own health. And I've chose the die fast route to benefit them. So that's the kind of choices that are.
What are you dying fast of, Keith?
Probably kidney cancer. I have cysts in all of my organs, but I can't go get the final say, and I'd rather not know.
Oh my, Keith! I wish you the very best. I'm so sorry to hear that. Thank you for the call, though. Thank you for sharing your story with us, Keith. Good talking to you. We'll be back. It's coming up on 10 minutes. It's about 10 minutes before the hour right now. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, the True People's Media, the place where despair is not an option. Stick around. We'll be right back. So they're confirming now that Trump's big immigration raids the weekend before last, where it was like, he's going to round up millions of people, said Trump. And all over the country, undocumented immigrants were like literally hiding. And it turns out that they rounded up 32 people. These were all people, by the way, who had arrest warrants because they had committed crimes in the United States, in addition to being here without documentation. They rounded up 32 people. So why do it the way he did it? Well, this is a Stephen Miller production. The goal was to terrorize people who might be thinking of coming here from another country, in particular people of color, and to terrorize people of color who were here without documentation. And when somebody decides to engage in a policy with the specific goal of creating terror, what do you call them? Anyhow, Lisa in Quebec, Canada. Hey, Lisa. Thanks for watching us on YouTube. What's up in Quebec?
Hi. Oh, my gosh. I'm so excited that I'm on. I'm a huge fan.
Thank you.
I wanted to talk a little bit about Medicare because it really upsets me when I hear all of the untruths that's out there,
Yeah.
It's very easy here.
And the Canadian system is also called Medicare, right?
Yes,
yeah.
yes.
Okay.
Yes. And you have a Medicare card, and you go to the hospital, you see whatever doctor you want. It's never, there's no 6 months waiting list. A colleague of mine, her husband had a major heart attack about 2 weeks ago, and within 6 days he had a quadruple bypass surgery. He's already home, and he's doing fine. I mean, there's no such thing as, waiting in line, and right. It's simple. Okay, our taxes are a bit higher here, that's true, but everybody gets the same amount of care. Everybody goes to the best schools. Both of my nieces, my son just graduated from colleges, debt-free. Okay, maybe
really?
$6,000. Yes.
Yeah.
For a 4-year program, Concordia or McGill, or you could go to York. It's usually foreign students that pay.
You can afford to go to McGill? That's amazing. I thought that might be the place that was wow.
No, it's very reasonable. Like I said, it's about maybe $6,000, 6 to 8,000 for a 4-year program, a bachelor.
Wow.
You can go on to do. So it's
the total tuition is $6,000 for 4 years?
It's about that.
That's amazing.
You know.
And why can't America be as civilized as Canada?
I don't understand it. It blows my mind. It's I don't know what American. What are you guys afraid of? It's just
the billionaires are afraid of high taxes.
Mind-blowing.
I mean,
mind-blowing to me.
And it's the billionaires who are funding. I mean, it was the Koch brothers who funded the whole Tea Party thing, which was a pushback against Obamacare. You know. And Obamacare guaranteed the profits of the insurance companies. It's like,
exactly.
I'm banging my head against the wall.
Speaking of insurance, also private insurance. I mean, in the province of Quebec, everybody has to be insured in some way or another for medication. So, for me, my insurance comes through my job because I work for the government. So I pay premiums out of my pay per month. Mm-hmm. And that covers all of my meds at 80%. So my blood pressure medication per month costs me out of pocket about $25 a month.
Wow. My blood pressure medication costs me $140 a month.
Well, that's
it's insane.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable.
Welcome to America.
And if you're on welfare or anything like that, the government covers the subsidy for you.
Yeah. So,
I mean, there's no such thing as not being able to buy medication. My EpiPen I have to have. It costs me $22.
There's $600 here in the United States, the EpiPens.
It's unbelievable.
One of my kids has a bee sting allergy, and she has to carry an EpiPen, and there's $600.
It's unreal.
And it's epinephrine. I mean, it's a generic medication that was developed in the 19th century.
Yeah, it's unreal. So I'm just stunned sometimes listening to your program, and Americans, you guys better wake up.
Yeah, amen.
Wake up.
Amen. Lisa, thank you for the call. Thank you very much. It's great to hear from you.
Thank you.
I appreciate
Great show.
Thank you.
Okay.
Domini in Tree Martin, Utah, listening on KPFK. Hey, Domini, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I love listening to you. Years ago, I got hooked on you when you started explaining about individual rights being granted to corporations and that kind of being the start of this mess.
Uh-huh.
And you put it in layman's terms, and I would drive around all around Southern California, and I think, oh, my gosh, he made it so I finally understood. And the light bulb went on.
We just have a minute, though, until the end of the hour here, Domini.
Okay,
so to your
real
point.
Quick, my son got hired on by a Mormon bishop business owner. Utah is amazing, job boom market. The people are wonderful, gracious. Mormons are very, very nice people. But he asked his foreman about health insurance, and it is mandatory, as you know, out here in Utah. And they told him an extra $80 a week. And they're so good to their workers in so many ways, but we just don't have it right now. And I'm about to start a new job, so I totally get it. And I wanted to let you know, 2 years ago, a neighbor of mine in California said her parents were from Germany, and that there was a magazine with a picture of Trump with a Hitler mustache wrapped in an American flag.
Yeah,
and that her parents were so scared of Trump's resemblance to Hitler, they wanted to go back to Germany.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, if Germany sees the resemblance between Trump and Hitler, why can't more Americans make the connection? I was saying he's following Hitler's plan during the campaign.
Yeah.
Anyway, the health insurance, you're right, it's a travesty, and it's all for profit, and the little people here at the bottom, we're all struggling.
Dominique, I got to run, but thank you for the call. Thank you so much. And her, to her point, by the way, Der Stern, which is like Time magazine for Germany, had this picture of Trump doing the Hitler salute. When the Germans call you a Nazi, you're a Nazi. We'll be back with Congressman Mark Pocan for the hour, taking your calls.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
You know, every day here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Louise and I and our team, Sean, Nate, Shira, Dave, Chase, Sue, Nigel, Ron, we all work to put together the very, very best show we possibly can. And there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the show. And one of the things that comes out of that is a lot of content, a lot of specific information that we go through and we dig out and, we want to share with you. And Sue puts that into our newsletter every week. And I think you will, if you don't already receive our newsletter, it comes in email every day, about an hour after we're off the air, or maybe a couple hours after we're off the air. And Sue goes through and pulls literally every link to every story that we talked about and puts it into the newsletter. It's free. We don't sell the list or anything. You complete safety and security. There's no charge. There's no nothing. Just, plug in your email address over at thomhartmann.com and you get signed up for the newsletter. It's all fairly obvious. You'll see it on the website. So check it out, thomhartmann.com. Thank you. Our book for today on the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Kingdom of Lies, Unnerving Adventures in the World of Cybercrime by Kate Fazzini. This is from the preface. It didn't take me long in my career as a cybersecurity executive to figure out everyone was lying to me. The biggest lie of all came at the very beginning, that cybersecurity is hard, too hard, certainly too difficult for someone who lacks years and years of deep technical training. That is no place for writers. That thicket of incomprehensible jargon alone seemed meant to discourage outsiders like me from entering the field. They told me I could never hope to understand the terminology unless I'd worked around it for a very long time, unless I had a special and complicated certification, unless I knew how to take apart and reassemble a computer, unless I knew how to code in Python and could read it, interpret it, and spot problems on sight. And if I somehow managed to learn the lingo, the learning curve for the rest of it would prove insurmountable. Lies, lies, lies. It's unfortunate because there's a huge gap between the demand for cybersecurity workers and the people available to fill those jobs. I think one of the reasons for that is because people can't imagine themselves doing this kind of work. Can you use a smartphone, make a PowerPoint, think on your feet, ever organize a night out to the movies with your friends that went well and nobody crashed their car to or from the event? Welcome to the 21st century's hottest career path. Are you able to charm the pants off women? Did you escape an abusive marriage? Have you ever hosted a toddler's birthday party at your home? Honey, I want you on my cybersecurity team. After reading the stories in this book, you will understand that what makes cybersecurity complicated is the complexity of human beings. So if you know how to deal with people, you can handle internet security. If you understand what makes people tick, not only will you be able to recognize a threat, you'll be one step ahead of your adversary. During my career as a cybersecurity executive at multinational corporations, a journalist for Wall Street Journal and later CNBC, and a professor at Georgetown University, I've met a lot of fascinating people. From the hackers who perpetrate malicious attacks to the security professionals who try to prevent these incidents from happening, and the alphabet soup of government agencies that do damage control. At the end of the day, they're all fathers, sons, mothers, sisters, and spouses. In other words, people just like us. Yes, the white hats cross paths with black hats and change alliances more frequently than you might expect, but they're driven by the same desires as the rest of us, even if sometimes it feels as if everyone in cybersecurity is allergic to the truth. As a professional, I was told a great many lies about the field I've grown to love so much. After becoming a journalist on the cybersecurity beat, I was told even more. Here are a few. Let me introduce you to the hacker community. This lie is usually delivered with a wink and a nod from someone who thinks they know every hacker on the planet. The truth of the matter is there is no hacker community. Sure, the guys who make a splash at the big annual conferences might say otherwise, but every country, every state, every faction, every identifying group has its own community of people who hack computers. Some of them are extremely conservative. Others are massively liberal. Some fall in between. Some wear suits and ties and work as lawyers during the day, while others look like everyday citizens and have great people skills as they pursue the idiosyncratic agendas. Some are good guys who got fed up with the low pay and boring duties and became criminals. Some are criminals who ended up being good guys. Many start and end their careers on either end of that spectrum. Some, including many you'll meet in this book, are extremely proficient hackers who have no time or inclination to identify with any community at all. As a journalist, I was astonished at the number of people who came out of the woodwork to offer me exclusive access to the hacker community. I couldn't help but notice that the members of the source's hacker community were often people just like him or her. My point is there are many different types of people working in this field, and I can guarantee you that a lot of them are exactly like you. Here's another lie. He's a luminary in the cybersecurity field. He's probably not. Fame and luminescence don't typically intersect in this field. The people I've met who are actual geniuses aren't famous, and most of them don't have social media profiles. They tend not to pontificate on areas outside their expertise. The people who are constantly headlining conferences and who are so often offered up to me for interviews have less insight than those who stay underground. Anything a high-profile hacker is willing to share typically carries with it a massive and crystal clear agenda that I've learned to spot from a mile away. Even if a conversation is off the record, the intel coming from a top government official or other marquee corporate cybersecurity name carries little novel information. The only people who have illuminated the way for me in this world, and in this book, have been genuine practitioners who never held a C-level title. You've never heard of them, and because I've changed their names to protect their privacy, you probably never will. They are luminaries not because of the degrees they've collected or the events they've headlined, but because they carry a lantern that guides the path for others. These types of people typically don't have a public relations team. One of my favorite lies, he doesn't know what he's talking about. This one is usually delivered by someone who asserts that he or she knows the cybersecurity field better than anyone else. These people will brag that they know what it's like to be a hacker and can do things that no one else in the room can do. I'm always wary of those who try to establish their bona fides by discrediting the expertise of other cybersecurity professionals. The depth and breadth of this field is so vast that anyone who works in it is an expert at some part of it. And I have yet to meet someone who is an expert at all of it, not even close. Every view of an incident is informed by the reviewer, what he sees, what her level of expertise is, and that changes over time. It's like asking someone who lives in the plaza to describe Manhattan. The book is Kingdom of Lies by Kate Fazzini.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Congressman Mark Pocan is typically with us on Wednesdays in our first hour, but tonight Louise and I are flying up to Vancouver to pick up this cruise ship. We're going on a listener cruise with a bunch of listeners to our program. We're doing one next year too. The information is on our website. The next year's one is going to be a lot less expensive than this year's one. We learned a lesson from that. But anyhow, we're going to be gone for the week. Jefferson Smith will be filling in for me, and doing a fine job. And of course, we'll be carrying large chunks of the Mueller testimony live on our program when it's live, when we're on the air. Jefferson Smith will be handling that too. So anyhow, all of that said, Congressman Pocan dropped by today instead of tomorrow. So because tomorrow's going to be the Mueller hearings, it's going to be madness. And he's here in our second hour, which is great. Congressman Pocan, welcome back.
Thanks, Tom. Glad to be here.
It is officially Middays with Mark here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Congressman Pocan, of course, is the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. He's here with us typically every Wednesday. He represents the 2nd District of the great state of Wisconsin. His website is pocan.house.gov, and you can tweet him at Rep. Mark Pocan. So before we pick up calls for you, just a quick question. What do you think about Mueller's going to be testifying tomorrow, and then this is the last week for like a little over a month that Congress is going to be actually working. I've heard some people calling on Nancy Pelosi to keep Congress in session so that some of these investigations can move forward. I'm curious your thoughts on all that and how you think all this is going to play out.
Sure. It's a busy week. We have a budget caps deal and lifting the debt ceiling coming up for a vote. We have the Butch-Lewis Act to deal with pensions coming up for a vote. A couple bills on the border. We've got some resolutions on BDS today and other issues. We are going to have the Mueller hearing tomorrow, along with other hearings. We're also doing hearings about conditions at the border tomorrow as well that'll probably get a lot less attention because of the Mueller hearing. But it's a busy final week before people go in district for the next month, and I think people will have probably lots to talk about.
Yeah. Wow. I'm looking forward to the Mueller hearing. It's going to be fascinating. So anyhow, let's pick up some phone calls. All right.
Sure.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Morris in Long Beach, California. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
How you doing, Congressman? Good morning to you, Tom. Congressman, I got an idea that I think will blow your socks off. It's a bumper sticker. Thom Hartmann gave me the idea. It's a bumper sticker. It's a red, white, and blue bumper sticker. It's got Donald Trump on it, wearing his with a suit on, red tie, White House behind him, the flag, and on this bumper sticker, it's red, white, and blue. It says, "The face of hate, vote." What do you think, Congressman? I got you laughing.
Well, I think, last week, just since our last time I was on this program, a lot came down. I think that's when the president had his rally, and he directly went after members of Congress, very specifically Ilhan Omar from Minnesota. And, we've had to deal with this because this is definitely statements of hate, and then he kind of continues it with their chants from people, "Send her back," and then, he said he didn't like it, then he defended people. And, there's only one way to look at it, Morris, is, he's out there with hateful speech, this time including members of Congress who happen to be people of color. So I don't disagree with you. I'm not sure if that's there's a magic bumper sticker that'll actually be a silver bullet to the election. Nothing wrong intended by saying silver bullet. I just mean there's no magic probably set of words that may get us there. But I do think every time the president does one of these actions, like he's done in going now after members of Congress, especially women of color, he certainly shows people who he really is, and I think that message is absolutely getting across, Morris.
Lisa in Venice, Florida. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hello?
That's you, Lisa. You're on the air.
Great. I had a question for the congressman. A couple weeks ago on Tom's program, you said that you were going to Homestead, and we've had a hard time getting out the word that there is a child containment camp here in Florida. I wondered if you were able to go and what was your experience?
Yeah, in fact, Lisa, tomorrow we did get out to visit Homestead, and tomorrow we are doing a hearing with the heads of the various divisions that oversee not just Homestead, but the 11,000 children that are currently placed in about 130, 140 facilities across the country. So we're going to be doing that, and then the afternoon, Homeland Security Appropriations Subcommittee will be doing similar over the facilities that we run. So, unfortunately, I think the Mueller hearing will get all of the oxygen that's in the room, but hopefully you'll see some accounts. We're really going to hold these people accountable because clearly having kids held that long in these facilities, longer than max is supposed to be around 20 days. I talked to people there 75 days, 60, and 45. We're a group of 4 girls that I talked to, and one of them, they just started to try to reunify with her brother the week before. Well, it's $750 plus a day. Maybe there's not a great incentive for these private firms to do that, and that's part of what we got to get to the bottom of. So Lisa will be getting more of that information out with the hearing tomorrow, but members of Congress have a number of CODELs over the next month visiting facilities. We're going to keep these efforts up.
Great. Russ in Hickory Hills, Illinois. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Yeah, Mr. Pocan, it's nice to talk to you. And Tom, yeah, I was listening to Joe Scarborough about the debt ceiling and the budget. It sounds like you guys already caved on this. You're giving them 2 years, letting them off the hook. You ain't getting nothing out of it. Why so early in July? I thought it was October. Are we running out of money, or are you guys just caving because you're not getting nothing for 2 years?
Yeah, well, a couple of things, Russ. One, I mean, we are running out of money. They said probably by early September. And since we are in district in August, this was a window. I suppose you could have waited till we came back in September, but you'd have a very, very narrow window at that point. Second is it lifts the debt ceiling for 2 years, and I'm one of these people who thinks that once you appropriate something, that should automatically be lifting the debt ceiling. You shouldn't have a separate vote that causes potential chaos, so we're dealing with that for 2 years. And then it does lock in some good, strong additional funding on non-defense that's out there. Now, I got to take a look at all the details, and we're going to have a conversation with a lot of other members about it, but it's I don't think he's getting anything other than I do think he is going to be able to show we're putting a lot of money into the economy by the levels of spending, way more than he's ever publicly said he supported. And that, in that sense, that's good for any sitting president because it'll help boost the economy at a time it could be having some slippage. So, you might make that argument. But I think the issue really is we had to deal with this by early September. We are running out of money. They said they had to adjust the timeline. And getting the debt ceiling lifted for a couple years, in my opinion, is probably a good thing. The other details we can still have debate about, but I don't even know why we'd have a separate vote on the debt ceiling, because that's why you have appropriations process, and sometimes that's what just mucks things up by people like from the Tea Party.
Yeah, in fact, the debt ceiling is an artificial thing that the Republicans put into place back in the late 50s, as I recall.
Yeah, so lifting it for 2 years isn't necessarily bad in and of itself.
Yeah, amen. Len, in New York City, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hello, Congressman. Let me just preview the question by Brett Stevens, the guy who writes for the Times. Said you can't get rid of the medical insurance business because it has 500,000 jobs in it. So I did a quick mathematics. That's 500,000 out of 160 million, or 0.3%. Just 3 months of hiring. So my question, though, is why, if I can explain how to shift from the private insurance business to Medicare for all in about 6 or 7 sentences, why is it so difficult for an Elizabeth Warren to explain it? How basically we're just going to offer the public option to individuals, and we'll offer the public option to every corporation, and we're going to have everybody choose it simply because it's going to be less expensive, and we'll readjust the payments based on how the requirements are for the evolution of the change. Along with, obviously from day one, starting to negotiate the price of insulin, so it costs 1/10 of what it costs everyone now. And it seems like, when Elizabeth Warren was asked...
Len, let's get the answer from Congressman Pocan.
Yeah, Len, I can't speak for other individuals, but I'll tell you this. First of all, I agree with you completely on Medicare for All. That's why I'm one of the early, strong sponsors and supporters of the bill. But two, I do think, you brought up a good fact. I mean, first of all, I have talked to a CEO of a fairly large insurance company who they can't really make money on health insurance well anyway because of rising costs of prescription drugs and some other things that make it very difficult to be profitable, and they are businesses to be profitable. So even they don't totally look at this as something that doesn't make sense, because let's face it, every westernized country out there has some sort of universal health care. So I think, that shouldn't be the argument that you're worried about those jobs, because there'll be other jobs that come out of a transfer like this. More importantly is people will have health care, and that will provide all the small businesses that currently pay for health insurance. That money now can be reinvested in their businesses and hire new people and buy new equipment, and that's going to stimulate the economy. There's a lot of arguments we can make.
Yeah, it's a good, strong thing to do. It really is.
Yeah.
Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour. It's Middays with Mark, hour 2 on Tuesday here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Congressman Pocan is the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. He represents the 2nd District of Wisconsin in the U.S. House of Representatives. His website, pocan.house.gov, and you can tweet him at @RepMarkPocan.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And we'll be back with your calls for Congressman Pocan in just a moment. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, the place where sane people get their news. And welcome back, James in Spokane. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Oh, hold on, gentlemen. I love you both. Huh?
Yeah, go for it, James. I'm getting a weird echo, though.
Yeah, I was wondering about that myself. Congressman, something you could do for me personally, whatever you can do to mitigate the horror that is our prison system and the war on drugs, they're both very undemocratic. The reason for my call is this: you chief executives, probably you congresspersons, probably deserve more money, and if you got it, maybe you could finance your campaigns better yourselves. So how about doubling your salary, and in exchange for that, you guys arrange to double the minimum wage?
Well, James, the one thing I don't agree, I guess, if you double our salary, you want us to pay for campaigns, because what's going to happen is then you're just going to have rich people who are able to fund campaigns out of their other money. We already have half the people here are millionaires, so I don't know if that will solve the problem we have here. But specifically on the prison issue, I used to be the ranking a Democrat on the Corrections Committee in the Wisconsin legislature when Scott Walker, our former governor, was the Republican chair of the committee. So I've dealt with prison issues for a very long time, and I agree with you. I mean, I think the fact that you've got people who are incarcerated for drug offenses, who have mental illness, there's a number of things. We could seriously reduce that population, give people treatment and things that they actually need to live productive lives and save a whole lot of money along the way.
Joseph in Ojai, California. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Yes, there's two things. First of all, I heard
Please pick one, Joseph. Well, that's weird. This is
okay. I heard an interview with Trump's first wife, in which he said that he kept a copy of Mein Kampf on his night table by his bed.
I think we lost Joseph.
Yeah, and I wasn't hearing. I was still getting that ringing in the background.
Yeah, he was talking about Mein Kampf being, and I'm not sure this is on our end, Nate, because what I did was I put Congressman Pocan on Hybrid 2 and it went away. So I think that there might be something happening on his end. But anyhow, in fact, can you put him on Hybrid 2, Sean? Okay, cool. So let's. We still have, we just have a minute left. What he was talking about, and I heard a little bit of it, Congressman, was that according to Ivana Trump, Donald's first wife, he had the collected speeches of, it wasn't Mein Kampf, it was the collected speeches of Adolf Hitler on his bedstand next to his bed. That was, I don't know if it was a joke because he doesn't read or if that was the only book he's ever read, but I think he wanted to get your thoughts on Trump as a fascist. Somebody earlier had called in whose mother-in-law, I think, or some relative was from Germany, and mother and father-in-law. And when Stern, the Time magazine of Germany, came out with a Trump doing the Hitler salute, they said, when Germans call you Nazis, you're a Nazi, and they wanted to move back to Germany. It freaked him out. So your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I haven't seen the other comments from his first wife, but clearly, I think a lot of people are afraid when you start singling out groups of people or individuals. A lot of this is things in history we've seen in different places that have never gone well. So. And someone who is so fond of demagogues in other countries doesn't look good. So it's a concern.
Yeah, amen. We'll be back with more of your calls for Congressman Mark Pocan in just a moment. His website, pocan.house.gov. You can tweet him at @RepMarkPocan. Be sure to say hi and thanks for coming on this program every single week. It's just great having him here. We'll be back with more of your calls for Congressman Pocan in just a moment. Stick around. It's the Thom Hartmann Program. Speaking the truth, some multinational corporations would really rather you didn't know all about. Every day here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Louise and I and our team, Sean, Nate, Shira, Dave, Chase, Sue, Nigel, Ron, we all work to put together the very, very best show we possibly can. And there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the show. And one of the things that comes out of that is a lot of content, a lot of specific information that we go through and we dig out and, we want to share with you. And Sue puts that into our newsletter every week. And I think you will, if you don't already receive our newsletter, it comes in email every day, about an hour after we're off the air, or maybe a couple hours after we're off the air. And Sue goes through and pulls literally every link to every story that we talked about and puts it into the newsletter. It's free. We don't sell a list or anything. You complete safety and security. There's no charge. There's no nothing. Just, plug in your email address over at thomhartmann.com and you get signed up for the newsletter. It's all fairly obvious. You'll see it on the website. So check it out, thomhartmann.com. Thank you.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Congressman Mark Pocan with us, taking your calls for the hour. And, whoa, that echo is coming out of your system there, Congressman Pocan. I'm not sure. That was here. I tried. Oh, that was here? Yeah, oh, okay. Okay. All righty. Congressman, you can hear me, right? Congressman Pocan on Hybrid 2? That is okay. Okay, I'm going to move him to Hybrid 1. Let's see if we can hear him now. No, same thing. Congressman, there's something funky with your phone system there. I don't know if you could just pick a phone up and talk to us or something. Pot him up, Sean. Yeah. This is not working. So, Congressman, I'm just going to hang up, and we're going to call you right back. And please just call us right back, and we'll just continue this because there's something wrong here. There's something wrong with this phone system, and then we will continue picking up phone calls. So, Congressman Pocan is going to call back, hopefully. But anyhow, yeah. Sean's going to take care of this. So, one of the things I've got a science story here that I meant to share with you. There's a record high temperatures in Alaska now have sent salmon into cardiac arrest. This is how bad global warming has gotten. We've reached the point now with global warming where in Alaska, the fish are having heart attacks. It sounds like a joke, but it's not. I mean, the fish are actually having heart attacks. Brown bears fishing on tidal flats. Climate change can have, and here they go. Humans have been eating salmon in Alaska for 11,000 years, but now the salmon are having heart attacks. It's absolutely astonishing. And the water can't be over 70 degrees. So, well, he won't be, okay, he's back now. Congressman Pocan, are you there?
I am here.
Okay, I don't know what happened, but it definitely was happening on your end or on the phone line between us, and so.
Gotcha. I can hear you better.
Okay, good. That's good. Okay, so let's go back to taking our phone calls here. Stephen in Albuquerque, New Mexico. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Yes, Congressman Pocan, I have a question about the Mueller report. Wasn't he restricted from the very beginning into not going into Trump's finances? I'm specifically relating this to the NRA money laundering some millions of dollars from Russia to his election committee. I'm just wondering, what good is this report going to be? And when he goes on television tomorrow to be answering your questions, if none of this is connected to his finances?
Well, I mean, it's connected to the Russians interfering with the elections, the areas that Mr. Mueller covered, and then specifically the report. So he didn't look at emoluments clause. He didn't look at a lot of other issues. So I do think, not everything is under the purview, but you're still going to get a lot of information out of the hearing.
Kathy in Madison, Wisconsin. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi. Thank you, Mark Pocan, for being my congressman. I was wondering if the Democrats had considered, and I know that they're talking about impeachment, even though they're not directly moving on it, if they had considered to include among the charges what Trump has done within the administration, making it more corrupt than possibly ever before. And specifically, when you look at the departments, he's got people in there working at cross purposes to the reasons those departments and agencies were established in the first place.
Right. So I don't
know how that could be.
We just have 30 seconds. Congressman Pocan, your thoughts?
Yeah, Kathy, I think if we do get to full impeachment, there's a lot of things we can add to that list, and we should. Right now, though, I think, we've got the Mueller report, we've got the emoluments clause issue, we've got his taxes. There's a number of things that we have different committees investigating, which could someday all be part of any impeachment process.
We'll be back with more of your calls for Congressman Mark Pocan right after this short break. Congressman Pocan is the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus in Pramila Jayapal. Run that august body, shall we say. And he also represents the 2nd District of Wisconsin in the U.S. House of Representatives. His website, pocan.house.gov, and you can tweet him at Rep, as in Representative, Rep Mark Pocan. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Middays with Mark, Tuesday edition here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Occupying the media 3 hours a day, 5 days a week, right here. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from The Undercommons, Fugitive Planning and Black Study by Stefano Harney and Fred Moten. This is from the introduction. It starts with love, exchange, fellowship. It ends as it begins, in motion, in between various modes of being and belonging. and on the way to new economies of giving, taking, being with, and for. And it ends with a ride in a Buick Skylark on a way to another place altogether. Surprising, perhaps, after we have engaged dispossession, debt, dislocation, and violence, but not surprising when you have understood that the projects of fugitive planning and black study are mostly about reaching out to find connection. They are about making common cause with the brokenness of being. A brokenness, I would venture to say, that is also blackness, that remains blackness, and will, despite all, remain broken, because this book is not a prescription for repair. If we do not seek to fix what has been broken, then what? How do we resolve to live with brokenness, with being broke, which is also what Moten and Harney called debt? Well, given that debt is sometimes a history of giving, at other times a history of taking, at all times a history of capitalism, and given that debt also signifies a promise of ownership but never delivers on that promise, we have to understand that debt is something that cannot be paid off. Debt, as Harney puts it, presumes a kind of individualized realization to a naturalized economy that is predicated upon exploitation. Can we have, he asks, another sense of what is owed that does not presume a nexus of activities like recognition and acknowledgement, payment and gratitude? Can debt become a principle of elaboration? Moten links economic debt to the brokenness of being in the interview with Stefan Shukatis, who he acknowledges that some debts should be paid and that much is owed, especially to black people, by white people. And yet he says, I also know that it is, that what it is that is supposed to be repaired is irreparable. It can't be repaired. The only thing we can do is tear this stuff down completely and build something new, end of quote. The undercommons do not come to pay their debts, to repair what has been broken, to fix what has been undone. If you want to know what the undercommons wants, what Moten and Harney want, what black people, indigenous people, queers, and poor people want, what we, the we who cohabit in the space of the undercommons want, it is this. We cannot be satisfied with the recognition and acknowledgement generated by the very system that denies A, that anything was ever broken, and B, that we deserve to be the broken part. So we refuse to ask for recognition, and instead we want to take apart, dismantle, tear down that structure right now. That right now limits our ability to find each other, to see beyond it, and to access the places that we know live outside its walls. We cannot say what new structures will replace the ones we live with yet, because once we have torn stuff down, we will inevitably see more and see differently and feel a new sense of wanting and being and becoming. What we want after the break will be different from what we think we want before the break, and both are necessarily different from the desires that issue from being in the dark. Let's come at this by another path. In the melancholic and visionary 2009 film version of Maurice Sendak's Where the Wild Things Are, 1963, Max, the small seeker who leaves his room, his home, his family to find the world beyond, finds a world of lost and lonely beasts, and they promptly make him their king. Max is the first king the wild things have had, whom they did not eat, and who did not, in turn, try to eat them. And the beasts are the first grown things that Max has met, who want his opinion, his judgment, and his rule. Max's power is that he is small while they are big. He promises the beasts that he has no plans to eat them, and that this is more than anyone has ever promised them. He promises them that he will find ways through and around, and will slip through the cracks and re-crack the cracks if they fill up. He promises to keep sadness at bay and to make the world with the wild creatures that roared their terrible roars and gnashed their terrible teeth and rolled their terrible eyes and showed their terrible claws. That Max fails to make the wild things happy or to save them or to make the world with them is less important than the fact that he found them and he recognized in them the end of something and potentially the path to an alternative in his world, or an alternative to his world, excuse me. The wild things were not the utopian creatures of fairy tales. They were the rejected and lost subjects of the world Max had left behind. And because he shuttles between the Oedipal land where his mother rules and the ruined world of the wild, he knows the parameters of the real. He sees what is included and what is left out. And he is now able to set sail for another place, a place that is neither the home he left nor the home to which he wants to return. Moten and Harney want to gesture to another place, a wild place that is not simply the leftover space that limbs real and regulated zones of polite society. Rather, it is a wild place that continuously produces its own unregulated wilderness. The zone we enter through Moton and Harney is ongoing and exists in the present, and as Harney puts it, some kind of demand is already being enacted, fulfilled in the call itself. While describing the riots of London in 2011, Harney suggests that the riots and insurrections do not separate out the request, the demand, and the call. Rather, they enact the one in the other. The book is The Undercommons, Fugitive Planning and Black Study.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. 34 minutes past the hour. Congressman Mark Pocan with us, taking your calls for the hour. And Congressman, I during the break, I just checked my email, and I got an email from FreedomWorks, the Koch brothers' big organization. And I just have to read this to you. I want to get your take on it.
Sure.
It's to, I'm signed up with Donald Trump's campaign as Fred Flintstone. I'm signed up with the Koch brothers as Barney Rubble. Barney, the Republicans in Congress must stand up and oppose Nancy Pelosi's toxic spending deal, and they've only got days to do it. If passed, this disastrous bill would raise government spending by $320 billion and send America sprinting towards bankruptcy, practically eliminate the budget caps Tea Party conservatives fought so hard to put into place, and leave you, your family, and your friends footing the bill for generations to come. Tell Congress to oppose Pelosi's toxic spending bill now. Barney, AOC and her socialist squad are jumping for joy at the prospect of this bill passing. They know this bill will drastically grow government and free them up to waste as much of your tax dollars on their socialist agenda as they please. Thankfully, conservative Republicans like Jim Jordan and Mark Meadows are fighting tooth and nail to stop this disastrous bill dead in its tracks. But Barney, they can't do it by themselves. They need your help. That's why I'm asking you to send Congress a message and tell them to oppose Nancy Pelosi's toxic spending bill. And then you can click the button, and all that kind of stuff. What do you think?
Well, I mean, first of all, it's interesting, right? It's Nancy Pelosi's deal, according to them, and trying to move forward. But I still think, what we've talked about is, this is when you have this kind of a spending push, which is just a normal appropriations process. This is helpful to any president who's up for re-election. So there's, I think, a reason why Donald Trump was willing to go this direction as opposed to some of these conservative groups. So it'll be interesting to see what happens on the Republican side, but I don't think they're going to prevail.
Yeah, when FreedomWorks starts pounding the drum, though, and talking about, their wholly owned Republicans, but how many more? I mean, it's going to be interesting. It's going to be very interesting. Okay, let's get back to our phone calls. Nicholas in San Cristobal, Mexico. Hey, Nicholas, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Tom, how are you? Thanks for taking my call. Congressman Pocan, an honor. This call is sort of general. Every single person I know, I think without a single exception, is horrified, dismayed, angered, and outraged, basically, by the $750 a day we are told, underline told, it is costing us to care for and feed and house immigrants. Who is in charge of receiving the bill for this? Who's in charge for a full audit of those figures? And has a full audit been run? And if not, why not? Where is that money going? Nobody believes the amount can be real.
Yeah, Nicholas, so it's your money, our money as taxpayers, and this is exactly what we're doing in a hearing tomorrow on the Labor, Human Services, Education Subcommittee of the Appropriations Committee, and I'll be there because when I asked those questions of the department, why can this cost $750 a day, I was there, bunk beds and minimal other amenities should not total $750.
I can get a suite with a daily massage for that, for less than that in a Marriott. It's like
it's so ridiculous.
Resort.
They're going to point to the healthcare and the education stuff, but again, we've the education is so loud in there. I couldn't even hear in a classroom someone with a microphone 6 feet away from me, right? So there's no education going on, so that's not a legitimate expense. But when I did ask the department, how can you justify this, the answer they keep giving is, well, there's always a surge when you have to open up a new facility. I'm like, this facility's been open for a year and a half. There can't be that surge anymore. Why is it still? They don't have answers. So that's definitely some of the questions we're asking tomorrow, because there is no incentive for a private firm to do what they're supposed to do, which is get these kids placed in 20 days or less. And that's why when I talked to a group of 4 girls, they were there 75 days, 60 days, 60 days, 45 days, because you can make a lot of money at $750 a day housing kids. And the one girl, Tom, told me just in the last week they tried to find her brother to try to place her. So that meant for the first 53 days they didn't do anything other than collect money. And that's what we're trying to get answers on.
And I thought it was 3 days for kids and 20 days for adults.
No, it's 20 days in these facilities. They have some waivers because of the surge. This is a surge facility. It's 3 days in the intake when you first come in, the processing centers. But then when you get to a facility like this, it's 20 days.
I see. Okay. Jared in Downingtown, Pennsylvania. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hello, Tom, and hello, Congressman Pocan. Well, I can't say that I'm pretty shocked, but I have to say I agree with Freedom Works here. We shouldn't be passing any spending bills at all because, I mean, if you look at, first of all, this is going to help Donald Trump. And second of all, the real question is, why is it that Democrats are not holding hearings on the report that just came out from TruthDig that from 1998 to 2015, the Pentagon has $21 trillion unaccounted for being spent that they can't account for. And there still has not been a full audit of the Pentagon. And it's time for us to really understand, like, where our money is being spent. Because under the Constitution, we as American taxpayers are supposed to know where our money has been going. But ever since the Manhattan Project, there has been blacklisted spending in our government. So things like nuclear weapons, that's not factored into defense, like this refurbishing of our nuclear weapons and everything else. And I just want to know, like, when are we going to have hearings?
Yeah, Jared, so first of all, I mean, we've got to do the operations of government, so you're going to have spending. You can't factor in if it's going to help the president or not. I just think that has to be taken out of the equation. And just so everyone understands, this is the budget caps. So this is just setting overall numbers. The spending bills are separate. That's the appropriations process. That was the NDA, the National Defense Authorization, which actually I didn't support. I think the point you bring up, Jared, that is extremely valid and we need to do, and I think we are going to make a priority in the next year as a Progressive Caucus doing, is the defense spending has skyrocketed, and we have to get a real grasp on it. And this year, it was the numbers that came out of the House were $733 billion, the biggest ever. The cap out of this deal is adding $5 billion to that. But just in fiscal year 17, the last year under Barack Obama, it was $618 billion. That's almost a 20% increase in just a couple of years. That has to be looked at much closer because every dollar that we waste somewhere that's not needed could have gone to education or dealing with climate change, investing in new forms of energy or healthcare or a lot of other things. So I think you're going to see a very much a renewed effort looking at this because to see the top number come out at a time that the House is under control of the Democrats, to me is a huge problem. That's why I voted against that authorization, one of 8 Democrats to do that. And we've got to get a much better grasp on this.
Josh in Boulder, Colorado. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hey, Tom. Congressman Pocan, with animal agriculture being one of the biggest contributors to greenhouse gas emissions, cows being one of the worst contributors, Wisconsin has taken the most dairy subsidies of any state over the last 22 years. The Green New Deal doesn't address animal agriculture, but recognizing that climate change is an existential threat, will you call for an end to animal agriculture subsidies and initiatives to educate the people on the planetary effects of switching to a plant-based diet?
Yeah, Josh, I mean, you know, I think if people want to switch to a plant-based diet, would that help the environment? Yes, but I think if we put our focus on that rather than big corporations making big profits off of not wanting to clean up their processes, I think we would be way, way, way off on target. I think you can look at multiple things at a time, but honestly, I want to keep my focus on fossil fuels and some of these other areas I think that are going to create the biggest problem that we could reverse and we need to reverse. Not dismissing, you're right, a plant-based diet would be better for the environment in the long run, but it's also not the biggest perpetrator we need to address.
George in Chicago, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Thank you, Tom. You've often reminded us of the solemn statement by President Johnson after the passage of the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, and the Housing Act. I fear we have lost the South for a generation. Well, it's turned out to be 2 generations, and we're going on a third. But I'd like to point out that there is another Civil Rights Act as important as those three, and that was the Wagner Act that was passed during the Roosevelt administration to enable all workers to have civil rights in the workplace, which was gutted by the passage of the Taft-Hartley Act in 1947 by the Republicans over President Truman's veto. And I fear that the Democratic Party has failed in its role to advocate for working people by not making it an absolute priority to either repeal the Taft-Hartley Act in whole or in part, or at least to pass the FCA, the Freedom of Choice Act. And despite the fact that we had the presidency and majorities in Congress for 8 years in the 60s, 4 years in the 70s, 2 years under Clinton, and 2 years under Obama, no significant pro-labor legislation has been passed. Until the working people of this country know that the Democrats are turning their back on the third way and pro-business Dems, you're going to keep on losing them to schmucks like Trump. I'm a working person myself, third generation of union member families, and until the Democratic Party makes it really clear that they're for the working people of this country, you're not going to win the way you should.
George, I agree with you. Yeah, I'm a 3-decade-long member of the Painters and Allied Trades IUPAT union. I was disappointed to see us not pass card check under Barack Obama, especially after he promised it. He, unfortunately, in those first 2 years was the only window they had that was the best window, and they lost that opportunity. But I can tell you there's some good things happening now, and the music's going to come in, so I have to catch it on the other end.
Okay, all righty. We'll be back. It's 45 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Middays with Mark, Congressman Mark Pocan, taking your calls for the hour. Stick around. We'll be right back. Also, Congressman Pocan's website, pocan.house.gov. You can tweet him at Rep. Mark Pocan.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
More of your calls for Congressman Pocan in just a moment. Stick around. And welcome back. Congressman, did you want to finish your thought on that?
Yeah, just, we passed last week raising minimum wage to $15, which at least lifts the floor for wages, and that'll have other ripple effects. This week we're passing the Butch-Lewis Act, which is a bill around union pensions, which is going to help working people. And there's a hearing in committee on the PRO Act, which is an overall positive bill that has all sorts of labor ramifications, making it easier to form unions, et cetera. So there at least is movement having the House majority, but I'm very realistic in realizing Republicans are in control of the Senate and the White House.
Charles in Prescott Valley, Arizona. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Yes, hi, Congressman Pocan. Do you know if the majority of your Democratic caucus knows that they can start an official impeachment investigation, hence more easily gathering evidence, without having to later send articles of impeachment to the Senate? As Tom knows, probably remembers that Lawrence Tribe believes Speaker Pelosi seems to not know the impeachment process all that well, which is, frankly, an unforgivable lapse.
Yeah, Charles, I think members understand, and quite honestly, I think Lawrence Tribe also understands that. He just disagrees with the Speaker, as do I, on this. I think we should start an impeachment inquiry because that will compel witnesses in some ways that we don't have hammers for otherwise to get them to come, and you don't ultimately have to file articles of impeachment. I completely agree with that, as do I think most members understand that. I think the thing that we have to understand is last week, while it wasn't the perfect worded resolution around impeachment, and it was specifically around some statements of hate as opposed to the Mueller report, it gave us a snapshot of the votes we have, and we were just under 100, which you're going to need 218 on. So I think it gives us, again, at least a map to look at. We know who wasn't there. People who live in those districts should ask their members why they're not ready to do impeachment. You've got a whole month. They're going to be back in district in August, a great opportunity to do that. But I think Lawrence was probably doing a little bit of hyperbole because the leader knows it very clearly. She, I think, is just concerned that if we start the process and we do it, and the Senate then says the president did nothing wrong, he's going to be living on that. She wants to make sure we have all the information ready to do this right. And again, I disagree with her. I think we should start the impeachment inquiry to get the witnesses, but tomorrow will be, I think, a day that will point to, I think, other future developments.
Congressman, we just have 45 seconds to the end of this break, or to the break. If Mueller, just kind of buttons up, and as the Justice Department has essentially told him, only talks about his own report. If there's not a smoking gun moment that comes out of this, what's next?
Well, there's all the other witnesses and the subpoenas and the violations of that, and how to get those witnesses to come and talk. I mean, Don McGahn and others are crucial to this report. So that's why, again, impeachment inquiry is a way to get people to come. That's why 80 some of us are in that camp. But I do think even having Robert Mueller say some of the stuff that's in the report on camera will be new to people, and that will be valuable at minimum.
Yeah, especially after Bill Barr, lied to us all.
Exactly.
Do you see Congress holding Bill Barr accountable?
Possibly. I'm not on that. The committee that's most likely to do it, which is probably Judiciary. So I couldn't tell you if they've had that discussion or not.
Right. Okay. We'll be right back. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. 10 minutes before the hour, Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls middays with Mark on the Thom Hartmann Program, Tuesday, second hour edition. David in San Francisco, listening on 9:10 a.m. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Oh, thanks, Tom and Congressman. The Midwest has been really hard hit by floods this year, clearly global warming, but the red states basically have been hard hit by floods, and FEMA is now apparently just showing up 3 friggin' months later. So this is obviously ammunition for the inadequacy of the Trump presidency, that he apparently doesn't even want to do anything to save the red states. I understand Jefferson City, Missouri is going to get their first office, and the top payout would be about $30,000, which is joke money. So, if you've got any, sway on that issue, it might be a wise idea to get started on saving the red states from a guy that just doesn't care.
Yeah, David, I think this is, one thing that points to you're not a Democrat or a Republican. I think when you get to the point that we've got to fund agencies like FEMA, and which is part of why we have to have an appropriations process that ultimately works, because where you put your dollars is really where you put your values. You can have bills with beautiful prose that say things that you may feel really good about, but unless there's often money behind something, it's not going to deliver what you want it to deliver. And in this case, something like FEMA shouldn't be partisan. It should just be efficient. It needs to have funding. And it's part of why, we fought the president when he shut down the government earlier this year. We're hoping that we won't have another shutdown. But, you never know with this guy, because he often works off of ratings rather than performance. And that's what makes it really tricky. And it seems like the people who go to his rallies and buy his caps don't care about performance other than his performance if it's stirring up hate and divisiveness. So it's really very unfortunate, David, and I hear what you're saying. Programs like that are just absolutely necessary and shouldn't be partisan, and it's odd that this president can't even get that.
Adam in New Orleans, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, Congressman. Trump's deliberate hate-filled antics are achieving his plan of grabbing the airwaves, ratings over performance, as you just said. He's dictating the terms of at least a portion of the next debate. Mainstream media is complicit in enabling this. How will the Democrats go on the offensive and recapture their voice? It's like a shotgun. They need to come together, in my opinion. But I'm interested in your response.
How do they go on the offensive?
Yeah, Adam, I completely agree with you. I mean, he does dominate the media, and the media are more than
complicit, pliable in doing just what he wants in this area. And that's always been a problem that we have. I think, what we're trying to do, and it's a little difficult when you have 24 presidential candidates because they're all trying to vie for various segments of a primary, but I think what we're trying to do in Congress is have that single voice about what people talk about at their kitchen table. You look at the bills that we've passed that address those core economic issues around health care and better wages and dealing with the culture of corruption in Washington. We've really addressed those. Those bills have been sent to the Senate, and Mitch McConnell's buried them in some backyard in Kentucky. And I think one of the things we're going to do in August is really talk about that, all those bills that we did that will help the average person who doesn't follow politics, just wants to be able to get by with their family and take a family vacation, have health care for their family, pay their mortgage. We've addressed those issues, and we're going to try to get that message across. But it's certainly the bigger bullhorn goes to whoever's the main candidate for president. We don't have that yet, so some of that makes it slightly more difficult.
Paul in Brooklyn, New York. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hello. Hello?
Hey, Paul.
Yep, you hear Paul.
You're on the air.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, great. So I recently read an article about how the conservative right-wing Christians have invested a lot of money into the elections in Europe. And considering Boris Johnson, his recent position as prime minister, and how much in now I think England's going to be with America, should we really be concerned? Should we be very concerned about how there is a right-wing conservative Christian takeover of cultural war going on, battling with the progressive direction that we need to be taking in America and the world?
Yeah, Paul, I think I've seen some other accounts, especially in some African nations and other places as well. This has happened, which is why there's some anti-LGBT equality movements in some African countries. I'm a little less worried in England. I think, some of the countries where this investment is aren't in countries like England with what just happened, and I do think also there's been some criticism from the incoming person against Donald Trump and his policies. So I don't think you're going to see it maybe be exact parallel. It's certainly closer to Donald Trump, but I still think you won't see it there as much as we're seeing it in other countries.
Jim in Garber, Oklahoma. We have just a minute to the end of the hour, Jim. A real quick question for Congressman Pocan.
Hello.
Yeah, you're on the air.
Okay. Mark, I wanted to ask you, why does Congress have to take off 5 weeks, same as in August, after they pass the budget and everything? Because isn't there other work to do that they've got to get done?
Yeah, Jim, so it's not that we're passing the budget, just so you know. The appropriations process will still happen in September because the Senate hasn't done anything. I just want to put that out there. But our job is just as important to be in our district as it is in Washington, D.C. In fact, I would argue it's of equal importance. I should be taking back what I hear in the district to Washington and explaining Washington back in the district. And right now, we've just been out here for 4 weeks in a row, got home for a week, 4 weeks, got home for a week, and then 3 weeks. This is our 3rd week. I think we need to get back and talk to people back home, and we'll do a better job in Washington. So I think this is an important period. Now you can connect directly with your member of Congress because you know they're going to be home. It's not an excuse that they're out in Washington. So take advantage of that. Your members should be visible, and this is your opportunity to make sure they know what you believe, and I hope everyone will do that.
And if your Congress member is a Republican and they're hiding out?
Go to their office. They're home. They're home for about the next 5 weeks, and people should take advantage of it.
Okay. Great. Congressman Pocan, thanks so much for being with us, as always.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tom.
Great talking with you. We'll be back. We're going to do a deep dive with Victoria Jones and Richard Wolff into Brexit and Boris Johnson. Stick around. It's going to get interesting.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
We say fight back!
know, every day here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Louise and I and our team, Sean, Nate, Shira, Dave, Chase, Sue, Nigel, Ron, we all work to put together the very, very best show we possibly can. And there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the show. And one of the things that comes out of that is a lot of content, a lot of specific information that we go through and we dig out and, we want to share with you. And Sue puts that into our newsletter every week. And I think you will, if you don't already receive our newsletter, it comes in email every day, about an hour after we're off the air, or maybe a couple hours after we're off the air. And Sue goes through and pulls literally every link to every story that we talked about and puts it into the newsletter. It's free. We don't sell a list or anything. You complete safety and security. There's no charge. There's no nothing. Just, plug in your email address over at thomhartmann.com and you get signed up for the newsletter. It's all fairly obvious. You'll see it on the website. So check it out, thomhartmann.com. Thank you. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from The Undercommons, Fugitive Planning and Black Study by Stefano Harney and Fred Moten. This is from the introduction. It starts with love, exchange, fellowship. It ends as it begins, in motion, in between various modes of being and belonging, and on the way to new economies of giving, taking, being with and for. And it ends with a ride in a Buick Skylark on a way to another place altogether. Surprising, perhaps, after we have engaged dispossession, debt, dislocation, and violence, but not surprising when you have understood that the projects of fugitive planning and black study are mostly about reaching out to find connection. They are about making common cause with the brokenness of being, a brokenness, I would venture to say, that is also blackness, that remains blackness, and will, despite all, remain broken because this book is not a prescription for repair. If we do not seek to fix what has been broken, then what? How do we resolve to live with brokenness, with being broke, which is also what Moten and Harney called debt? Well, given that debt is sometimes a history of giving, at other times a history of taking, at all times a history of capitalism, and given that debt also signifies a promise of ownership but never delivers on that promise, we have to understand that debt is something that cannot be paid off. Debt, as Harney puts it, presumes a kind of individualized realization to a naturalized economy that is predicated upon exploitation. Can we have, he asks, another sense of what is owed that does not presume a nexus of activities like recognition and acknowledgement, payment and gratitude? Can debt become a principle of elaboration? Moten links economic debt to the brokenness of being in the interview with Stefan Shukatis, who he acknowledges that some debts should be paid and that much is owed, especially to black people, by white people. And yet he says, I also know that it is, that what it is that is supposed to be repaired is irreparable. It can't be repaired. The only thing we can do is tear this stuff down completely and build something new, end of quote. The Undercommons do not come to pay their debts, to repair what has been broken, to fix what has been undone. If you want to know what the Undercommons wants, what Moten and Harney want, what black people, indigenous people, queers, and poor people want, what we, the we who cohabit in the space of the Undercommons want, it is this. We cannot be satisfied with the recognition and acknowledgement generated by the very system that denies A, that anything was ever broken, and B, that we deserve to be the broken part. So we refuse to ask for recognition, and instead we want to take apart, dismantle, tear down that structure right now. That right now limits our ability to find each other, to see beyond it, and to access the places that we know live outside its walls. We cannot say what new structures will replace the ones we live with yet, because once we have torn stuff down, we will inevitably see more and see differently and feel a new sense of wanting and being and becoming. What we want after the break will be different from what we think we want before the break, and both are necessarily different from the desires that issue from being in the dark. Let's come at this by another path. In the melancholic and visionary 2009 film version of Maurice Sendak's Where the Wild Things Are, 1963, Max, the small seeker who leaves his room, his home, his family to find the world beyond, finds a world of lost and lonely beasts, and they promptly make him their king. Max is the first king the wild things have had, whom they did not eat, and who did not, in turn, try to eat them. And the beasts are the first grown things that Max has met who want his opinion, his judgment, and his rule. Max's power is that he is small while they are big. He promises the beasts that he has no plans to eat them, and that this is more than anyone has ever promised them. He promises them that he will find ways through and around and will slip through the cracks and re-crack the cracks if they fill up. He promises to keep sadness at bay and to make the world with the wild creatures that roared their terrible roars and gnashed their terrible teeth and rolled their terrible eyes and showed their terrible claws. That Max fails to make the wild things happy or to save them or to make the world with them is less important than the fact that he found them and he recognized in them the end of something and potentially the path to an alternative in his world, or an alternative to his world, excuse me. The wild things were not the utopian creatures of fairy tales. They were the rejected and lost subjects of the world Max had left behind. And because he shuttles between the Oedipal land where his mother rules and the ruined world of the wild, he knows the parameters of the real. He sees what is included and what is left out. And he is now able to set sail for another place, a place that is neither the home he left nor the home to which he wants to return. Moten and Harney want to gesture to another place, a wild place that is not simply the leftover space that limbs real and regulated zones of polite society. Rather, it is a wild place that continuously produces its own unregulated wilderness. The zone we enter through Moten and Harney is ongoing and exists in the present, and as Harney puts it, some kind of demand is already being enacted, fulfilled in the call itself. While describing the riots of London in 2011, Harney suggests that the riots and insurrections do not separate out the request, the demand, and the call. Rather, they enact the one in the other. The book is The Undercommons, Fugitive Planning and Black Study.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
The curse of
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. That was a fascinating hour with Congressman Pocan. In this hour, I want to do a deep dive into the consequences of Brexit and Boris Johnson and who is this guy and what does all this mean, and particularly because I've seen a couple of reports suggesting that a hard Brexit, that is the Great Britain leaving the European Union without any kind of deals with anybody, could even tip over the entire global economy. And this is scheduled for October, so this should concern all of us. But let's start out with who is Boris Johnson and what's the deal here. On the line with us is our old friend Victoria Jones, who is the chief Washington analyst for the DC Radio Company, LLC. Her Twitter handle is Victoria Jones DC. Victoria, welcome back.
Thanks very much, Tom.
It's always great having you with us. So I understand Boris Johnson was born in New York. Does that mean he's not a natural-born citizen of the UK? I don't
think it works quite like that. But he went to Oxford. He's upper class. He cultivates a rumpled look, and well, he was fired from his first journalism job at the Times of London for making up a quote attributed to one of Britain's early Edward Kings. And he became a correspondent, and he was in Brussels. And this is a very interesting summary, I think, of his fellow correspondent's view of him. James Landale, who worked with him in Brussels and is the BBC's diplomatic correspondent, wrote a little 2-line poem. Boris told such dreadful lies, it made one gasp and stretch one's eyes.
Wow. So
that's the copy he wrote.
Here in the United States, the broad spectrum of opinion seems to range from Boris Johnson is a clown, and I don't think clowns graduate from Oxford, to Boris Johnson is the UK's version of Trump. Is there any truth to any of those perspectives? Well, who is this guy really? I mean, beyond the CV that you were just going through. I mean, ideologically, who is he? What sort of policies can you expect him to follow? Is he going to play the race card, for example, the way that Trump has done, things like that?
Well, if I may quote President Trump, nobody knows.
Right.
Because he was the Lord Mayor of London twice. And London is a liberal city. And he was a moderate conservative when he was mayor of London. And he was quite popular mayor of London. You don't get reelected in that city, which is a polyglot city. Multiple nationalities and cultures and languages spoken. He was popular. And he was elected twice. And that, of course, was his jumping off point. And his ambition as a young boy was to be world king. So he used that as a jumping off point to become what became a conservative. So he wanted to become prime minister.
Now, what does conservative mean in the United Kingdom? I mean, here it means that you're opposed to government involvement in, any kind of healthcare program. It means that you think that companies should be able to make up their own regulations when it comes to things like toxins or pesticides or pollution. Here in the United States, being a conservative means you think that Social Security is a Ponzi scheme and should be handed off to the big banks in New York. How much of the socialist, in quotes, infrastructure of England would be at risk when a conservative becomes prime minister? I realize Theresa May was. I mean, is this Edward Burke conservatism, or is this William F. Buckley conservatism, or is how would Ronald Reagan conservative? What does that mean?
Well, it varies depending on the prime minister. I mean, the trains, for example, the trains used to be British Rail. Then they were broken up. And there was news out today that, in fact, which is a great day to release the news because it was bad news about the trains, but doing something or other with the trains, I skimmed over it because I was reading about Johnson, was going to cost more than was expected. And I thought, oh, great day to dump that news. Yeah. And because the privatization of the trains has not been particularly profitable, and a lot of commuters are calling for making them national again, national ownership. Right. Johnson, I'm sure, would be opposed to that. The National Health Service, there are moves to bring in all kinds of different aspects of privatization, but to break it up completely, that would be hugely unpopular. He is in favor of a fair number of things that Republicans here would be in favor of, but not all of them. The thing is, we don't really know what Boris Johnson believes. We really don't know. So even though he says he wants a hard Brexit on Halloween, come what may, does he? We may find out more at a Prime Minister's Question Time coming up this Thursday.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. But for anybody who's listening or watching who has never seen Prime Minister's Questions, I'm sure you can find clips of it on YouTube. Just type those 3 words in. It is basically a weekly meeting where the Prime Minister stands in the well and members of Parliament shout questions and talk back, and it's a very lively give and take. Am I characterizing that well, Victoria?
Yes, and he's going to love it. He is going to just turn it into the Boris show.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to be fascinated by that. And is it true what Andy Borowitz is saying in the New Yorker, that the Queen is thinking about moving to Canada now that Boris Johnson is Prime Minister?
I don't know. I've been reading about this. I've not seen confirmation of that, but there are rumors of that. By the way, the Financial Times is reporting that Johnson has hired the executive of Sky, the big media company, Andrew Griffith, to be his chief business advisor in Downing Street. Well, what's interesting about that is that Griffith loaned Johnson his £9.5 million Westminster townhouse from which to run his campaign. And so Labour is sort of basically saying that one of Boris Johnson's first acts is to dish out a powerful job in number 10 to his super rich pal. And, is he basically can Johnson's friends buy influence within the new administration is the question.
Is this like Donald Trump hiring Bill Shine to run his media stuff? Bill Shine, formerly of Fox News, not Murdoch's right-hand man. What was his name?
Well, he was hired to be in the communications part, which didn't work out too well. But this is his chief business advisor. So it's a different role.
As in economic policy.
Yeah, but what role he'd actually play, I don't actually know.
Right.
You know, Johnson doesn't only face Brexit; he's got some pretty immediate things. He's the next ambassador in Washington. He's got to appoint that quick.
Right.
Iran, Iran seized a tanker, at least one British tanker. He's got to sort that out.
So, I mean, he's been after he was mayor of London, he became a member of Parliament. In fact, he was as of yesterday, wasn't he?
Yes, he was a member of Parliament. He was also the foreign minister, and he made a number of gaffes that were widely reported, and he was considered to be rather ineffective as foreign minister. And so he does make gaffes. Now, he's not a stupid man, but he doesn't always study. He doesn't always think before he speaks, which can be quite funny and quite clever sometimes. But sometimes in a very high-profile role, this may not serve him well. Or maybe it will these days. It's hard to tell.
What's the British sentiment broadly with regard to Brexit, a negotiated Brexit, which I think the president of the European Union just ruled out this morning? I saw that in the Financial Times. No more negotiations. We offered you a deal,
right.
Take it or leave it, or we worked it out with Theresa May, or a hard Brexit, which is where Great Britain leaves the European Union and has to kind of start from scratch in terms of negotiating trade agreements with different individual countries.
Johnson is boasting that would be fine and all kinds of things like that, so he'll mount a big PR campaign about that, I think. I think the sentiment is still very mixed on Brexit. People are exhausted. Some people have sought therapy about Brexit, literally.
Wow.
But I think hard Brexit is something many people do not want. They are aware. They've read about how there are going to be massive lines to Dover, to cross the channel. They've read about problems with the supply chain, that they might not be able to get medication, various foods. They're aware that hard Brexit could be a huge, huge problem.
Well, it's going to be a hell of an experiment if it happens. It's fascinating stuff. Victoria Jones, the chief Washington analyst with the DC Radio Company, LLC. Victoria, thank you for dropping by.
Thanks, Tom.
And Victoria's Twitter handle is Victoria Jones, DC. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
By the way, at the bottom of the hour, in about 10 minutes, thereabouts, maybe 15 minutes, we're going to have Professor Richard Wolff talking about whether a hard Brexit could take down the U.S. economy. And welcome back. Kathy in Hendersonville, North Carolina. Hey, Kathy, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. How are you today?
I am great, but I'll get better, Kathy. I hope the same is true for you.
I don't know if I can survive another 15 months of this, but anyway.
We've got to push through, Kathy.
Yeah.
And this country's been, through hell and back. We had a civil war. We went through World War II. We went through the Great Depression. We'll pull through this.
Well, I'm a little bit younger than you. I'm 68 years old, so I remember vividly.
We're the same age. 68.
Well, we're the same age then.
Yeah.
Anyway, the question I had for Congressman Pocan, and I'm sorry I didn't get there, but I have a question. I'm a CPA, so I understand finances, debits, credits, whatever. But the other thing is I'm also a historian. And my question is that I would have to him is, does Congress, and both houses, have a fiduciary responsibility to the taxpayers and the money that is spent?
There's nothing specific or explicit about that in the Constitution, to the best of my knowledge. And
that I know, but to me, my taxes, I don't have control over how my taxes are spent.
Right.
But what gets me is the number of social programs, and the cutting of everything, and most of the cutting is in spite of Barack Obama by this president.
Right.
But at the same time, we have paid over $104 million for him to go play golf.
Right.
And
he used to criticize Obama for this. He played more golf in his first year than Obama did in 8.
I'm a statistician. The numbers, I understand numbers. I dream numbers. So I understand what he did to Obama and what they have. The hypocrisy is the main DNA of Republicans and this president.
Right.
I'm not a real fan of Republicans, but
well, the extent to which you asked if you had, or actually you asserted that you don't have control over how your tax dollars are spent. In actual point in fact, I mean, all appropriations have to begin in the House of Representatives. In Hendersonville, North Carolina, you may be represented by a Republican, so you may feel like you're not represented. But if you want to put pressure, if you want a pressure point that you can assert energy into, that has to do with how your money is spent, it's your local, or not your local, it's your member of the House of Representatives,
which is Mark Meadows, and the man is.
He's a wholly owned subsidiary of Koch Industries.
Oh yeah, I went to a town hall, and the way he conducts his town halls is you have to write your question down,
right.
And they may answer or ask or read the question.
Yeah. Yeah, that's cowardly. I get it. Kathy, I got to run.
If you have another hour, I can tell you about Mark Meadows, but I hear your music. So.
Yeah. Well, the next week, call back, and I'll be back, and we can talk about it. I'd be fascinated to hear. Kathy, thank you for the call, and thanks for watching Free Speech TV. We'll be right back with more of your calls right after this. Every day here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Louise and I and our team, Sean, Nate, Shira, Dave, Chase, Sue, Nigel, Ron, we all work to put together the very, very best show we possibly can. And there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the show. And one of the things that comes out of that is a lot of content, a lot of specific information that we go through and we dig out and we want to share with you. And Sue puts that into our newsletter every week. And I think you will, if you don't already receive our newsletter, it comes in email every day, about an hour after we're off the air, or maybe a couple hours after we're off the air. And Sue goes through and pulls literally every link to every story that we talked about and puts it into the newsletter. It's free. We don't sell a list or anything. You complete safety and security. There's no charge. There's no nothing. Just plug in your email address over at thomhartmann.com. And you get signed up for the newsletter. It's all fairly obvious. You'll see it on the website. So check it out, thomhartmann.com. Thank you.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Some of the stuff that we've been talking about today, the conservative snowflakes are just like out in full force. I shared with you, and this was way back in the first hour of the program, a new fundraising email that I got from the Donald Trump campaign, offering to sell me for, I don't know, $30 or something, some plastic straws. Official Donald Trump plastic straws, so you don't have to put up with those paper straws, those liberal, they literally called them liberal paper straws. Right. Number one. And number two, at the same time, Arkansas is outlawing calling a veggie burger a veggie burger. Because, they got triggered, right? Veggie burger? Oh, we can't have that. Meanwhile, the Supreme Court, back in 2012, in their decision in National Federation of Independent Business versus Sebelius, said that red states don't have to expand Medicaid to all of their citizens who are working people but making under roughly $14,000 a year. The states don't have to do that. And as a result of that, according to a new study from the National Bureau of Economic Research, based on actual government statistics, 16,000 people, 15,600 people have died as a result of, like Rick Scott, when he was governor of Florida, refused to expand Medicaid, and Charlene Dill died because she was cutting her her heart medication drugs in half. This obscenity, it's just amazing. So anyhow, picking up your phone calls, Albert in Los Angeles. Hey, Albert, what's up?
Hey, Tom, thanks for taking my call. I want to talk about socialism and what it means with insurance. So insurance, quick question. Have you ever gotten your money back if you have not gotten sick?
No, because insurance doesn't work that way. Insurance is all about spreading the risk.
For somebody else, right? It goes to pay for somebody else. So when I hear these conservatives talking about, socialism all the time, what they're talking about is your money going to pay for somebody else, which is the exact same system that we already have in an inefficient way. If Barack Obama would sit next to me, I would ask him, Mr. Obama, what does the health insurance company do to make you get better? And I would tell them that's rhetorical. The answer is nothing. I pay them, and then they pay the money that I give them to the doctor,
right,
and take a cut out of that. So if the aggregate of the health insurance market prior to Obamacare is $100 and the insurance cut is 10%, then the individual mandate, or we all pay into the system, it goes up to $200. If their cut is still 10%, they just made $10 more. So under his system, the insurance companies got richer, and I'm validated by, if you go look at their quarterly reports.
Oh, their profits have been higher than they've ever been, Albert. Yeah, excellent points all, and that's a great talking point for Democrats. I hope they pick it up. Thank you, Albert. Charles in Opelika, Florida. Charles, what's up? We got about a minute here to a break.
I'm just so really pissed off with, I think the Democrats should just say, let's not, talk to Robert Mueller right now, and let's try to get this thing where he will be able to speak, because there's no transparency in this Republican administration and Donald Trump's administration. And, I just think we need the unfeathered count of what happened. And to be honest with you, to me, this is just an onslaught on our democracy, because they're trying to diminish what Martin Luther King and the civil rights did. And this is all about, to me, we ought to approach defeating Donald Trump as, we need to think of Donald Trump as the white racist Martin Luther King. I just don't think we realize the depth of what conservatives and Republicans will do to keep power and to
well,
keep
we may see something coming out of this hearing with Mueller that's positive. He has asked that one of his aides be sworn in, and I think that might be, and I may be completely wrong, we'll find out tomorrow morning, but I think that may be because Bill Barr has told him there are things he can't talk about. And so I think when it comes to those things, what he wants to be able to say is, I can't talk about that, as an employee of Bill Barr's, but my aide here, former aide, he can talk about it. And, I wonder if Bill Barr is scurrying around in the background, rat that he is, to figure out some way to stop the aid. I don't know. Anyhow, we're going to ask Professor Richard Wolff at the bottom of the hour here right after this break. Is it possible that a hard Brexit, which Boris Johnson campaigned on and just became Prime Minister of the UK, could actually take down the U.S. economy?
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And then, of course, we're going to check in with Talk Media News as well. We'll be back. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Our book today is Us Versus Them, The Failure of Globalism by Ian Bremmer. This is from Chapter 1, titled Winners and Losers. It's time for a local revolution, the candidate told the roaring crowd. Countries are no longer nations, but markets. Borders are erased. Everyone can come to our country, and this has cut our salaries and our social protections. This dilutes our cultural identity. Marine Le Pen's 4 sentences capture every important element of the anxiety rising across the Western world. The borders are open and the foreigners are coming. They'll steal your job. They will cost you your pension and your health care by bankrupting your system. They will pollute your culture. Some of them are killers. Le Pen fell short in her bid to become France's president in 2017, but her message remains compelling for the 21st century politics of us versus them. But this is not a story about Marine Le Pen or Donald J. Trump or any of the other populist powerhouses who have emerged in Europe and the United States in recent years. Spin the camera toward the furious crowd. There's the real story. It's not the messenger that drives this movement. It's the fears, often, if not always, justified, of ordinary people. Fears of lost jobs, surging waves of strangers, vanishing national identities, and the incomprehensible public violence associated with terrorism. It's the growing doubt among citizens that government can protect them, provide them with opportunities for a better life, and help them remain the masters of their fate. As of December 2015, just 6% of people in the United States, 4% in Germany, 4% in Britain, and 3% in France believe the world is getting better. The pessimistic majority suspects that those with power, money, and influence care more about their cosmopolitan world than they do about their fellow citizens. Many citizens of these countries now believe that globalization works for the favored few, but not for them. And they have a point. Globalization, the cross-border flow of ideas, information, money, people, goods, and services, has resulted in an interconnected world where national leaders have increasingly limited ability to protect the lives and livelihoods of their citizens. In the digital age, borders no longer mean what citizens think they mean. In some ways, they barely exist. Globalism, the belief that the interdependence that created globalization is a good thing, is indeed the ideology of the elite. Political leaders of the wealthy West have been globalism's biggest advocates, building a system that has propelled ideas, information, people, money, goods, and services across borders at a speed and on a scale without precedent in human history. Sure, more than 1 billion people have risen from poverty in recent decades, and economies and markets have come a long way from the financial crisis. But along with new opportunities come serious vulnerabilities, and the refusal of the global elite to acknowledge the downsides of the new interdependence confirms the suspicions of those losing their sense of security and standard of living that elites in New York and Paris have more in common with elites in Rome and San Francisco than with their discarded countrymen in Tulsa, Turin, Tuscaloosa, and Toulon. The globalists gutted the American working class and created a middle class in Asia, former White House strategist Steve Bannon told The Hollywood Reporter a few days after Donald Trump's 2016 election victory. The issue is now about Americans looking not to get effed over. End of quote. In the United States, the jobs that once lifted generations of Americans into the middle class and kept them there for life are vanishing. Crime and drug addiction are rising. While 87% of Chinese and 74% of Indians told pollsters in 2017 that they believe their country is moving in the right direction, only 43% of Americans said the same thing. In Europe, the European Commission and the unelected bureaucrats who enforce its rules have legislated for its 28 member nations without understanding their very needs. In recent years, they've failed to halt a debt crisis that has forced many Europeans to accept lower wages, higher prices, later retirement, less generous pensions, and an uncertain future, all while telling them that they must bail out foreign countries that have spent their way into debt. In the migrant crisis, globalist European leaders insisted that all EU members must accept Muslim refugees in numbers determined in Brussels, and barricades and a spike in nationalism were the result. I'm defining nationalism here as one form of us versus them intended to rally members of one nation against those of other nations. Were the wave of populist nationalism sweeping the United States and Europe only signs of globalism's failure, it would be bad enough. But there's a larger crisis coming. Many of the storms creating turmoil in the U.S. and Europe, particularly technological change in the workplace, broader awareness of income inequality, are now headed across borders and into the developing world, where governments and institutions are not ready. Developing countries are especially vulnerable because the institutions that create stability in developing countries are not as sturdy, and social safety nets aren't nearly as strong as in the United States and the European Union. They face an even bigger gap between rich and poor, and the reality that new technologies will kill large numbers of jobs that lifted expectations for a better life will be much harder to manage. In short, just as the financial crisis had a cascading effect through financial markets and real economies around the world, So the sources of anger convulsing Europe and America will send shockwaves through dozens of other countries. Some will absorb these shocks, some of them won't. As poorer people in developing countries become more aware of what they're missing or losing, many will pick up rocks. The book, Us versus Them by Ian Bremmer.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. On the line with us, Professor Richard Wolff, the economist, co-founder of democracyatwork.info, the author most recently of Understanding Marxism. rdwolf.com is also his website. You can tweet him at Prof. Wolf. And Professor Wolff, welcome back to the program.
Thank you, Tom. Glad to be here.
So Boris Johnson just became Prime Minister of the UK. I'm reading in the Financial Times that there are some people speculating that if this so-called hard Brexit happens on Halloween, the date that it's all scheduled to happen, and in other words, Britain goes all on its own as an independent nation, but it has stripped itself essentially by joining the EU of all of its different multilateral and bilateral trade agreements with other nations, that there will be hell to pay economically in the UK, but that perhaps more significantly, this will take a bite out of the general European economy. It'll damage the UK economy, and those two things may be enough to damage the world economy. And the US economy is sufficiently fragile right now that this could tip the whole thing over the edge. What say you, sir?
Well, I think you've pretty well summarized the report released today by the International Monetary Fund that reaches exactly the same conclusion. That namely says, and I could not agree more, that you are playing with fire here. Boris Johnson is for England what Donald Trump was and is for the United States. He's made his career because the British working class has suffered significantly worse conditions since the collapse of 2008 than have Americans. The standard of living the average standard of living of British workers is roughly 10% below what it was a decade ago today.
Whoa.
And the British people are suffering, they're angry, and they're bitter, much as are large swaths of the American working class. And Mr. Johnson used that situation to become a national politician, chiefly on two arguments that should strike everyone here in the United States as quite familiar. Number one, immigrants are a major source of our problem here in the UK. Those foreigners are coming here and misusing our social services, adding to our crime. Most of these things are factually false, but they are the ones that got him into power. The second argument is that foreigners, this time not immigrants, but rather foreigners, namely the European Union, are somehow victimizing Great Britain, rather in the way that Trump suggested that NAFTA victimized us, or that the Chinese are victimizing us, or that virtually everybody outside the United States is victimizing us, and he's the champion who's going to set it right. That's exactly what Boris Johnson is promising. He's going to correct the suffering of the mass of the British by really taking it to the poor immigrants on the one hand and the foreigners in Europe on the other. And since this is the basis of his arrival at this exalted position, having largely embarrassed most thinking people in England for the last 15 years of being in the limelight, you're setting up for a hard Brexit. That's what it's called. What's going to happen on the 31st of October, unless one or the other side says chicken before then. And if that happens, you're going to take a European economy already in trouble and plunge it into a mixture of downturn and uncertainty that is the last thing the world wants, given the downturn and uncertainty that Trump's trade wars have already created.
I remember that there was an economic component to the rise of Hitler, and John Maynard Keynes, in fact, said that if the Treaty of Versailles was signed, that it was so punitive to Germany that he said that, and this was after World War I, of course, he said that you're setting the stage for World War II. And turns out he was right. Is it possible that the British economy could slide into recession in such a terrible fashion, not necessarily that Boris Johnson's going to turn into Hitler, but that it could produce a new conflict on the European continent? Or is it more likely just to ripple across, and that in and of itself will cause crisis, particularly in those nations in the European Union, like Hungary and Poland, that already have hard right leaders, and countries like Austria and France, where you've got and Greece, where you've got hard right movements that are on the ascendancy?
Well, I think you could have, you're going to see politicians on the right looking at Hungary or Poland or Italy and now at England and wondering, understandably, whether their time has come. Whether a mixture of anti-foreignism, anti-immigration, nativisms of various kinds, religious, reactionary rediscovery of national churches, and so on, that this is a road to political power. I think, yes, that's a good possibility, and there's no reason why Mr. Johnson, having ridden his way to the prime ministership by denouncing immigrants and foreigners, why anyone should think he's going to give up that road is the same mistake as imagining that Mr. Trump will, since it has worked so far to get him to where he is. So, yes, I think since the economic prognosis is not good, that economic tensions and difficulties in Western Europe, North America, and Japan will continue to get worse, as they have been, and that covering them over with theaters of trade wars and anti-immigration outrages, that has been a way to get political power, and I would expect that they will continue to do that. There is, in England, however, a big difference. You have a real, well-organized, large opposition. That's the Labour Party with Jeremy Corbyn. Now, they are in a negative position in terms of public relations. They've had their problems, but they are an organized force that is dead set against not only the Conservative Party as a whole, but particularly the Boris Johnson wing of that party. A third of the voters in the Conservative Party in the election that brought Boris Johnson to power voted against him. So you have a fairly big split inside the Conservative Party. Put that together with a strongly and pretty well unified, at least against Boris Johnson, Labour Party with a long history and deep roots, and you're setting up for a very tough internal struggle over what is going to happen. And as the conditions, particularly of a bad Brexit, explode, the conflicts inside England are probably going to be the key to determining which way it goes.
So just to wrap this up, if England and the UK's economies are substantially shaken by a hard Brexit in October, how can we expect that to, that little earthquake over there on the other side of the Atlantic, how does that migrate over here, and what might it look like here if the world economy starts to wobble as a consequence of it?
Well, there are a number of ways that could play out. Number one, the European economy is in tough shape. They're going to follow the United States and try yet again with lowering interest rates to pump more money than they already have in to keep this boat with its holes afloat. How that plays out, whether that even works, is a big open question. Britain is a major player in the European economy even now, and if it really goes down, it'll take Europe probably with it. Europe has its own problems. The Italians are basically leaving the rest of Europe. They are the third largest economy. France has problems. The Germans are going through the end of the Merkel regime. They don't know exactly which way to go. Very bad timing, could really disorient. And people have to remember the overall European economy, EU, is larger as an economic unit than the United States. If they can't buy from the U.S., for example, as they have, if they cut back investing here as they turn to keep their own house in order, sort of the way the Chinese have cut back their investments in the United States, we're going to feel it right away. But here's another way it could play out. Boris Johnson is going to be tempted to join with Donald Trump in military adventures. You can see it already playing out with the tankers and Iran. You can see it happening elsewhere. If you add to this volatile mix the uncertainties of these trigger-happy leaders of two important military powers on what the Chinese and the others are going to do, and what Mr. Macron in France is going to have to do to salvage anything for himself, and he's the weakest of all in terms of his domestic situation. I mean, I cannot remember a time when you have so many negative economic and political factors honing in on governments like America and Britain that are less stable, less in charge, less on top of what's going on than the ones we have now.
Wow. It's enough to make you think we might be heading toward a worldwide Great Depression, a revisiting of the 1930s.
Very scary time, and if you're not scared, it must mean you're not paying attention.
There you go. Professor Richard Wolff, The Economist, co-founder of Democracy at Work, democracywork.info. His most recent book, Understanding Marxism, rdwolf with 2fs.com or democracywork.info. You can tweet him at Prof. Wolff. Professor Wolff, thank you again for dropping by.
Thank you, Tom. Glad to speak with you.
Thank you. I really enjoy it. I learned so much. Really appreciate it. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
And 4 minutes from now, we're going to check in with Doug Christian with Talk Media News, find out what the latest news is of the day. Stick around. Welcome back. Tom in Durham, North Carolina. Hey, Tom, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
You were talking about the Canadian healthcare system earlier with the woman from Canada.
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking about this in a larger sense. I was thinking about what would have happened if there had not been an American Revolution and we had stayed with the UK or Great Britain. And would we have ended up being kind of like Canada is? I mean,
probably.
Would we have eventually gotten our independence? Would we have ended slavery much earlier? Canada got its independence in 1867. I know it's part of the Commonwealth, but I was just curious about that. It's just sort of an interesting...
David Swanson wrote a remarkable book called War is a Lie. And this book so changed my perspective on war, frankly. And he suggested that, he just goes through every war that the United States has been involved in and says this war was not necessary, including World War II, which shocked me. But his take on the Revolutionary War was that at that point in time, we were in the process of basically becoming like Canada, that is a separate independent nation with a kind of cultural and nostalgic tie to the United Kingdom. And that the Revolutionary War was largely unnecessary, and that at a certain level it was being fought as much over. There was actually his argument is fairly complex, but it's a good one. So I encourage you to check it out. But it's a great question, Tom, but check out David Swanson's book War is a Lie. Thank you for the call, Tom. Mary in Palm Bay, Florida. Hey, Mary, what's on your mind today? Thanks for watching us on YouTube.
Yeah, I've watched your show on a lot of different topics, but this is the first time I've called in. I've been listening for a while, listening to some of the different topics. I kind of got little pieces of one fellow you had on, but I didn't catch his name. But it started with the lies of that they're talking about socialism, and then I heard you reading a bit from Ian Bremmer's book, and then your conversation with Richard Wolff, who I've heard. I don't really have a whole lot of comments about what you were speaking on as far as what Richard Wolff was saying, because I don't feel like I know enough information about how Brexit and Boris being the new leader and stuff is going to affect us. But my thoughts really went back to this whole scenario that's being presented to America with, are we going to be a socialist country? Are we going to be a capitalist country? And this whole tugging back and forth. I just wish you would speak on your opinions and your ideas on what I've been feeling for some time now, which is that I feel like Americans, the will of the people as far as a democracy is being undermined completely by the judicial system with independent cases. Because when I look, I see the states, when you put the vote to the people of the states, what they vote on is not what's being run through the courts, and I just feel like they're utterly corrupted. But aside from that, our two major political parties, I feel like we're not addressing the fact with when we talk right, left. I feel like Americans in general want tradition, want faith, values, and other things to remain intact and not have to sacrifice that to move forward with progressive agendas that provide social safety nets and address the economic downfall that everybody's experiencing.
Okay. Mary, thank you very much for your comments. We'll be right back. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. So every day here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Louise and I and our team, Sean, Nate, Shira, Dave, Chase, Sue, Nigel, Ron, we all work to put together the very, very best show we possibly can. And there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the show. And one of the things that comes out of that is a lot of content, a lot of specific information that we go through and we dig out and, we want to share with you. And Sue puts that into our newsletter every week. And I think you will, if you don't already receive our newsletter, it comes in email every day, about an hour after we're off the air, or maybe a couple hours after we're off the air. And Sue goes through and pulls literally every link to every story that we talked about and puts it into the newsletter. It's free. We don't sell a list or anything. You complete safety and security. There's no charge. There's no nothing. Just, plug in your email address over at thomhartmann.com. And you get signed up for the newsletter. It's all fairly obvious. You'll see it on the website. So check it out, thomhartmann.com. Thank you. So welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and let's check in with Talk Media News and find out what's going on in the world today. This report brought to you by goatsfortheoldgoat.com and Loving What You Do, Ellen Ratner's new book. On the line was Doug Christian with Talk Media News. Hey, Doug, what's up?
I'm doing all right, Tom. How are you doing?
Good. So what's happening in the world?
All right. We've got a budget deal that is quite a budget buster, and conservatives who used to be budget hawks are A, outraged, and B, supporting it. So take your pick.
Well, I got an email from FreedomWorks earlier. I shared it with Congressman Pocan and was going to talk about it on the air, in which FreedomWorks, of course, the Koch brothers' big front group, and in which they're saying that Mark Meadows and Jim Jordan are going to fight this thing to the wholly owned subsidiaries of the Kochs in Congress, the heads of the Kochhead caucus. What's it called? The Freedom Caucus. And saying, this is the squad. This is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. This is Nancy Pelosi, a liberal triumph. They're all hysterical about it. I think, frankly, because the billionaires are concerned that their taxes might go up. But on the other hand, I'm guessing that Trump is actually, and the Trumpettes are very excited about it because it's a $320 billion increase in federal spending, which is going to stimulate the economy and keep this economy intact, at least until the election. What do you think, Doug?
That's absolutely true. And he's most worried short term about making sure that he wins the 2020 election. And it is funny because I actually did run into Mark Meadows in the hallway during the run up to the tax cut. And I asked him, I said, I thought Republicans were for fiscal responsibility. How is this tax cut actually supporting the fiscal responsibility? And he said, actually, it will lower the deficit. That's what he said to me, and I have that on tape.
Yeah, right. That's the old Reaganomics argument is tax cuts pay for themselves, but every single time it's been tried, it's failed. And in fact, Kansas, Sam Brownback said, we're going to do an experiment in our state. And he radically cut taxes, and 2 years, 3 years later, they had to raise the taxes again because their school systems were gutted.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Of course, Tom Franks wrote about that brilliantly in his book, What's the Matter with Kansas?
Yeah.
And all right, so now, and of course, the continuing contra-temps with the squad, that continues because, of course, it is a great election strategy for this president. And of course, the squad is making it easier for him by when Democrats support health care for undocumented immigrants, or go for Medicare for all without where about 6 out of 10 Americans do not support that.
Right. Yeah, I think it seems from the surveys, and I think you're going to see these numbers change even in a more conservative direction once the ad season begins, particularly when the Koch brothers weigh in. It seems that a transition to single-payer health care that still allows for the existence of private health insurance companies is important. Canada banned private health insurance companies, and then they allowed them back in about 15, 20 years ago. And number one, and what was the other point that you made about the health care for immigrants?
Yeah.
This kind of baffles me because I would think even a billionaire like Donald Trump, if he's going to be, in a public area, maybe he just never goes out in the public. But if you're going to be walking down the street and the guy next to you is coughing, given that New York right now is having a tuberculosis crisis, you want to make sure that person has health care, whether they're an undocumented immigrant or not, so that they don't infect you. Isn't that a simple argument, or is that something that is just never going to make any sense to anybody?
That is a simple argument, but the thing is that poll numbers are critical in Washington, D.C., more so than logic. And so and that's why, by the way, you'll see people who were never Trumpers in the Republican Party saying, oh, we'll support him now, because they're looking at their own reelection prospects. Yeah. And they're seeing what happened to Mark Sanford when he dared to stand up.
To what extent, Doug, do you think that it's not so much that they're afraid of Trump taking them down in the general as they're afraid of getting a primary challenger, and that once the primary season's over, they may start throwing Trump over the bus or off the bus or whatever the phrase is, under the bus?
Yeah, that's, and in fact, Bob Corker would not have left the Senate had he not felt that there was going to be a primary challenge to him.
Right. Same with Jeff Flake.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I would say that that they are still mortally scared of that, and they haven't shifted from that. And of course, what we're looking forward right now to is the Mueller testimony that's going to happen starting at 8:30 Eastern Time tomorrow morning.
Yeah, and we'll be playing that live here. Doug, I'm sorry, we're hitting the end of the show. But Doug Christian with Talk Media News. Great talking with you, Doug. Tomorrow, Jefferson Smith will be filling in for me as Louise and I go off on our listener cruise. So we're going to have, I think I'm looking forward to a good time. And I'll bring you back all the stories. But Jefferson's you're going to be in great hands. And in the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It really isn't. It requires all of us. So get out there, get active, tag. You're it. We'll see you. I'll see you next week.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.